Chapter 923. The most powerful secret force against the most elite army soldiers, with the newest guns in their hands, seemed to be in a tense confrontation, but everyone knew who had the upper hand. The new 17th Division was the trump card of the Federation, but the small-eyed force was known as the most powerful special force of the Federation government. Countless bloody facts in the past 3 years had long proven this point. More than 100 ordinary soldiers of the new 17th Division wanted to take the guns of 300 small-eyed Special Force soldiers. No matter how you looked at it, it was impossible. But it was precisely in such a situation that Mad Manly walked out of the military vehicle and was too lazy to say anything. He said that there was no room for doubt. It seemed stupid and arrogant, but in fact, it was more of a contempt that originated from powerful strength. The elite special forces of the small-eyed unit stared at the young colonel, who had delicate features but gave off a strong sense of oppression. They gripped the automatic guns in their hands tightly and frowned. They did not surrender. Instead, they raised the muzzles of their guns a little because of a strong sense of danger. The situation was urgent, and it was on the verge of breaking out. It was the appearance of some officials urgently needed. Director Bailey, who had just squeezed out an angry expression to hide the panic in his heart, saw the reaction of his subordinates and calmed down a little. He lightly coughed twice and coldly reprimanded, "Colonel, I order you to immediately withdraw your troops, or the Joint Investigation Department will arrest you with third-level authority." Mad Manly did not even look at him. He still looked at the black mass of Special Force soldiers in front of him with a blank face. His eyes swept across their military uniforms and the eye-catching blood-red small eye emblem on the left arm of the military uniform. After a moment of silence, he reprimanded with a slightly mocking tone, "You are not soldiers. What qualifications do you have to be here at the front line? Do you think you can become a soldier by wearing a turtle robe?" The fat on the tip of Director Bailey's eyebrows faintly twitched. In addition to the anger of being ignored, he was more puzzled. As a senior official who was transferred from the Bureau of Proclamation to the Joint Investigation Department, he only needed to answer to the President and Chairman Lee J. Du. He had a very high authority. He did not believe that the crazy people of the new 17th Division would dare to mess around in front of thousands of people, let alone hurt him. Yes, he admitted that he was indeed very afraid of Mad Manly, but he firmly believed that even someone as crazy as this person would not dare to bear the crime of harming the Joint Investigation Department, because that would mean going against the Federation, which was equivalent to a mutiny or even a rebellion. Since that was the case, the new 17th Division seemed to have charged into the base with a murderous aura, but it was nothing more than trying to regain some glory. It was nothing more than Colonel Li Feng's new acting division commander trying to win the hearts of the soldiers, forcing the Joint Investigation Department to apologize and make a few symbolic concessions. Director Bailey firmly believed that his judgment was wise and correct, so he couldn't understand why these people were ignoring him. Even if they didn't want to negotiate for the sake of acting cool, how could he lower his head if he didn't negotiate? Mad Manly still ignored him. His eyebrows were like a wildfire that was about to burn. He stared at the 300 most powerful Special Forces soldiers of the Federation in front of him and said, "I know you guys are from Philadelphia and think that you are the best fighters in the world, so you are used to being arrogant." He suddenly raised his voice and spat out like a violent flame, "But in front of me, none of you have the right to be arrogant. I've been to all of your training halls and beaten up all of your masters. Before I die, you bunch of trash from Philadelphia better not put the name of Philadelphia on your heads. The purpose of forming this unit is to kill Su Lo. More than 300 people have chased after him for 3 years, but you couldn't even cut off a single hair on his head. Before that small-eyed man dies, what right do you have to be arrogant? No matter how arrogant you are still trash after all." The more than 300 soldiers of the small-eyed Special Forces suddenly changed their expressions. Some of them finally recognized the identity of this ruthless young division commander in front of them and remembered the past in Philadelphia many years ago. They remembered the 12-year-old boy who humiliated all the training halls in Philadelphia. If it were any other time, when this group of powerful special forces from Philadelphia were humiliated like this, they would definitely throw away all the restraints of discipline and use their blood to regain their honor. However, it was impossible for them to do so today because they were also facing people from Philadelphia. The back mountain of Faching City was the place where the essence of the Federation had been gathered for hundreds of years. The people there worshipped martial arts and were tough and aggressive. The dozens of training halls had cultivated many strong people like Kong Wu for the big families and powerful government agencies. However, the real reason why Faching City was famous and feared by the world was because of that old man, the family name that hung above Faching City like a crown. My surname is Li. I am Madman Li. The 300 soldiers with guns lowered their heads in respect. Some of the small-eyed special forces quietly placed their guns beside their feet. Scattered sounds of metal clashing sounded in the field. Although some of the soldiers were still holding their guns nervously and waiting for orders from their superiors, no one dared to look directly into Madman Li's eyes anymore. A person with empty hands was able to defeat the resistance of a group of fierce Special Forces soldiers with just his name. Other than the godlike influence of his family in Philadelphia, it was also because of his tyrannical and ruthless personality that had long become a legend. Who else could have such an intimidating presence other than him? At this moment, the heavy sound of rolling tracks suddenly sounded around the Y3 area of the base, mixed with the clear sound of hydraulic jumping. Dozens of black MX mechas solemnly entered the area and immediately took control of the situation. If the new 17th Division had shown up first to intimidate them, the small-eyed Special Forces would have had no choice but to surrender in the end. However, no one could say for sure whether or not there would be any bloodshed due to some unforeseen circumstances. Therefore, in Madman Li's plan, he had decided to show up first by himself to intimidate everyone and minimize the possibility of bloodshed. Director Bailey had been watching everything with a frown on his face. No one had paid him any attention, so he had the opportunity to analyze the situation. He accurately guessed Madman Li's thoughts, but for some reason, he just couldn't relax. The new 17th Division didn't want to cause bloodshed, but why did he still feel so strange? Director Bailey couldn't understand. He watched as the new 17th Division soldiers walked into the crowd and began to disarm. He felt a strange cold wind blowing between his eyebrows and ears, and he began to smell some sort of danger. If the new 17th Division finished disarming, then the entire small-eyed Special Forces, or more accurately, the officers of the Joint Investigation Department, would no longer have any power to protect themselves. They could only become shivering white rabbits, waiting to be skinned alive or cut into 13 pieces and braised behind the back of HDD Bureau. Director Bailey's breathing quickened. He couldn't just watch the situation develop like this. In order to stop the other from disarming, he gathered his courage and looked at Madman Li angrily. I'm going to report you to the Federation government. Madman Li, you must be severely punished by military law. Chairman Madman Li will not let you get away with this. By bringing up Li Jadu's name, he didn't expect to be able to suppress someone like Madman Li, even though the two were father and son. He only hoped that the soldiers of the small-eyed Special Forces would wake up and remember that Chairman Li Jadu was this person's father. He hoped that they would regain the will to fight, even if it was just the courage to hold a gun. However, he misjudged the status of the Lis of Philadelphia. The people of Philadelphia respected and were willing to obey Chairman Li Jadu largely because he was the only son of the war god. For them, the only ones who could truly represent the Lis of Philadelphia were the grandfather and grandson. Madman Li finally slowly turned his head to look at Director Bailey. He knew this person's fear and thoughts. In order to let his subordinates complete the disarming work, he didn't mind deigning to say a few words to this person. The complaint is invalid because this is the front line, not the Capitol ring, and not a rotten house like Parliament Hill or the official residence. As for military law, only the soldiers can speak for themselves. He looked at Director Bailey and said expressionlessly, "It seems that you know very well what kind of land you are standing on. Then you should understand that it is more dangerous for you to stir up trouble on the front line than to play tricks behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, you frame people and extort confessions through torture. Perhaps 2 or 3 opponents will plead guilty and be framed to death because of this. But in a place like the front line, what you do will put thousands of people in danger." Madman Lee's conclusion was, "So people like you should never appear on the front line in the army." There was a cold, murderous intent hidden in the calm words. Director Bailey felt his body getting colder and colder, as if there was a layer of frost between his eyebrows and eyelashes. For some reason, his voice became unusually hoarse and slightly trembling as he said, "If there is any violation of the rules of the Joint Investigation Department, I am willing to accept questioning and investigation under the framework of the Joint Staff Committee. If Commander Lee agrees, I am willing to surrender to the Military Police Headquarters and take the responsibility." The officers of the Joint Investigation Department behind him looked over in astonishment. They didn't know why the director suddenly became mentally ill and actually said that he would take responsibility. As a high-ranking department of the Federation government, any case they investigated was in accordance with the charter. What responsibility was there to talk about? Director Bailey didn't explain anything to his subordinate. He waved his hand and signaled for all the officers to leave with him. He would rather admit to framing the NTR unit of the new 17th Division than stay in front of Madman Lee for another 2 seconds. This is a very clever man. Unfortunately, he used all his cleverness to frame the dark curtain. Madman Lee silently thought as he looked at Bailey's back. He suddenly frowned and smiled somewhat strangely. He took the pistol from the staff officer beside him and inserted it into his belt. He said, "Who allowed you to leave?" Director Bailey's body stiffened and he stopped. Madman Lee said, "I said that people like you should never appear in the army and appear on the front line. I am very happy to see you accept the investigation, but I am more concerned about how to guarantee the word forever. What in this world could be called forever? Other than time, there was only death. Young Commander Lee thought so. I know it's really cheap to stop at this place again. The original plan was to definitely finish writing this paragraph, but aren't we cheap customers? This is a joke to calm everyone down. The main reason is that this new computer is really too cheap. I've been working on this all day today. I'll continue to work on it later. Starting tomorrow, I'll be dead if I don't work on this damn computer. Everyone, please understand." Chapter 924. He walked forward and took out a piece of paper from his left breast pocket. Facing the handwriting on it, he read, "Mu Fei Lu Yuqing Neo Fan Yong. Those who have been named will stay for investigation. The rest of the members of Small Eyes Combat Unit must leave the planet's surface in half an hour." He looked past Madman Lee's steel-like shoulder and looked at the gray sky. He nodded slightly and said, "The fleet's support ship is about to land." The Joint Investigation Department had 9 names named and asked to stay. Other than Director Bailey, there were 6 senior investigation officers and 2 commanders of Small Eyes Special Forces. These people had all participated in the investigation of the NTR unit of the new 17th Division and directly planned that cold-blooded and shameless framing. The new 17th Division did not accept Director Bailey's request to turn himself in to the military police headquarters. Instead, they demanded that they stay and accept their own investigation. Some of the hidden meanings gradually became clear, and the officers of the Joint Investigation Department finally understood why Director Bailey had acted like that before. A dangerous atmosphere permeated the field, flowing slowly and seeping along the edges of the cold steel mecha and guns, as if it wanted to freeze all the heat and noise. Director Bailey's face was slightly pale. Looking at Madman Lee's face, his fingers hanging by the side of his pants trembled slightly. He was afraid, but it did not mean that everyone in the department was afraid. The Joint Investigation Department had a rare high level of authority and directly reported to the President and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Over the years, they had wreaked havoc in the Capitol Ring's official and judicial circles, but they had never encountered a real challenge. This was especially true for the high-ranking officers from the Bureau of Proclamation. They had long been used to standing on the highest hill and looking at the targets they were investigating. Neo, who had been named, was one of them. He had entered the Bureau of Proclamation directly after graduating from university. Other than the 3 years of contact with the normal Federation Society in the Joint Investigation Department, he had always worked in that mysterious organization. Bathing in the sacred and inviolable the glory of the Charter for too long, he had naturally formed the same sacred and inviolable concept of the Bureau of Proclamation officials. He walked past Director Bailey, looked at Madman Lee's face, and said with a smile, "I'm sorry, but I can't stay according to your request, because my personal connections are still with the Bureau of Proclamation. Although you have an amazing family background, I think you still don't have the authority to arrest officials of the Bureau of Proclamation." His expression was that of a smile, and he even apologized. But to say such words in such a situation, there was a sense of pride and contempt in his indifference. The mysterious and powerful Bureau of Proclamation was the cornerstone of the entire Federation. No matter how powerful the government was, no one dared to go against the wishes of this organization. Even Parliament Hill and the office of the President had to show sufficient respect to this existence. This was a deeply rooted tradition or rule of the Federation. Even the federal military had to somewhat cowardly abide by all of this. They could only watch as the technical officers stayed in the base like bosses, contemptuously commanding the reconstruction and activation of the Charter network. In countless years, only a few years ago in the battleship 3320, Su Lo, who had the highest authority, had acted arrogantly in front of the entire Bureau of Proclamation. Today, in Area Y3 of the base, who had the authority to intimidate the Bureau of Proclamation? In the mines of Donglin, Feng Yu had educated Su Lo. In the wetlands of the suburbs of the capital, he had also taught Su Lo. The glory of the Charter was powerful, and its authority was terrifying, but in the end it was still people who carried out the Charter. This also meant that the upper limit of the glory of the Charter's power was determined by the upper limit of the ability of the person carrying out the Charter. Madman Lee didn't know that his granduncle, who had fought against the glory of the Charter for his entire life, had once made a precise plan for this situation. He simply carried out the highest rule in the army: whoever had a gun was the boss. Therefore, he raised the gun in his hand, aimed at the Bureau of Proclamation official called Neo, and pulled the trigger expressionlessly. Following the crisp sound of the gunshot, a spray of blood suddenly erupted from the back of Neo's head. Then, a deep bloody hole slowly appeared between his eyebrows, like the shocked and confused third eye of a monster. With a muffled bang, the Bureau of Proclamation official's body fell heavily to the ground like a sack stuffed with graphite ore. He bounced up slightly, then went stiff without feeling anything. The clear and spiraling sound of the gunshot reverberated throughout the base. It wasn't very loud, but it shook the eardrums of the 400 to 500 people a little and set off a storm in their minds. The soldiers of the new 17th Division didn't expect to see this scene, but after the shock subsided, they immediately felt an unprecedented joy. They felt pain for the innocent brothers who had died in the Southwest War Zone, and they felt joy for the bloody price of these sinister officials. Inside a MX Mecha in the northwest corner, Hua Xiaoxi watched the scene seriously through the optical system. The corners of his lips cracked open slightly in silent joy. In the division headquarters, Madmanly had once told them that in order to become a true member of the new 17th Division, one had to be ruthless enough. That dead Bureau of Proclamation official was clear proof. So this is what it means to be ruthless. With just a few words, a high-ranking Bureau of Proclamation official was turned into an ice-cold corpse under Madman Lee's gun. The elites of the Small Eyes Unit naturally felt the complete opposite of the new 17th Division. Most of them stared at Madman Lee's face with indescribable shock, trying to find a trace of ruthlessness or perversion on this young division commander's face, but they couldn't find anything. There was only calmness or perhaps apathy. A small number of elites of the Small Eyes Unit who hadn't been disarmed tried to pick up the guns by their feet under this mental attack, but then they heard the air behind them vibrate abruptly, stabbing into their backs like steel needles. Dozens of black MX mecha adjusted their postures slightly like cold steel giant. Their bodies tilted forward, and the Darlin autocannons on their mechanical arms began to rotate at high speed at the same time. The shrill humming sound stacked together, terrifying to behold. The stance of the new 17th Division was very clear. If the Special Forces of the Small Eyes Unit dared to fire back at this time, then the mecha group with the absolute advantage would definitely not mind using tens of thousands of bullets thicker than fingers to turn them all into minced meat. Director Bailey was very cold. From the moment Madman Lee stepped out of the military vehicle, this famous conspiracy expert who struck fear into the hearts of countless important figures in the Federation government and society had begun to feel cold and fearful. Until now, the chill had penetrated his chest and settled on his back, causing the beads of sweat to freeze. At the beginning, he hadn't understood why the new 17th Division wasn't willing to talk to him, and why Madman Lee was ignoring him. Only now did he understand. Who would be willing to waste time talking to a person who was about to die? The new 17th Division's crazy charge into the Federation headquarters base was not to make the Joint Investigation Department bow their noble and proud heads, but to directly chop off their heads. Did they think they could just kill him and his people so easily? Did they not need to investigate, interrogate, or even assign a crime? Did they not need to use torture to extract some evidence, or forge some evidence? Director Bailey stared at Madman Lee not far in front of him, as well as the officers and soldiers of the new 17th Division who were in an excited and dangerous state. He couldn't understand this phenomenon that went against his aesthetic and political ideals. Under the threat of death, his slightly trembling right hand reached uncontrollably towards his waist, almost touching the gun handle. Now that the situation had developed to this point, everyone present was sure of one fact, a cold, cruel, and undeniable fact. The 9 people who had been named by Heelay would definitely be killed by the new 17th Division today. One of them was already dead, slumped on the ground. 2 of the people who had been named were commanders of the Small Eyes Special Forces. As mentally and physically strong soldiers, they weren't willing to die just like that. Faced with such a cruel prospect, their gazes drifted towards the scene. Where their gazes landed, a few of the commanders who were loyal to the death stared at the ground beneath their feet. They didn't seem to have any interaction, but suddenly their bodies tensed up, and they pounced forward like ferocious tigers, holding military knives in their hands. Their target was Madman Lee, who was standing at the front. As long as they subdued this person, the Small Eyes Special Forces would be able to regain control of the current situation. At least they would have some room to bargain, and they should be able to save the commander's life. Several tiger shadows pounced, and in exchange, a few crisp sounds rang out. These reckless fellows were struck by a leg lightning bolt, and were sent flying more than 20 meters away. They spat out blood as they fell into the dust, and it was unknown whether they were dead or alive. They had charged over like ferocious tigers, and then turned into a few sick cats. That was because the young commander they had attacked was the Real Tiger. He was a tiger with the aura of the West Woods' thin tiger in his chest, a tiger that had grown up on the bloody battlefield. Madman Li pulled back his right leg expressionlessly and turned his head to stare coldly at Director Bailey's face. He didn't look at the hand that was reaching for his waist, but his gaze gradually became violent, and he lashed out viciously like a flaming whip. "If you kill us, how are you going to explain it to the Federation?" Director Bailey asked in a trembling voice. "Even if you are Madman Li, no one can protect you. That's my problem. I brought the troops to the base to kill you, of course. Do you expect me to send you to the military court and instill the spirit of the law in the troops while I'm at it?" Madman Li said, "I just said that the way soldiers solve problems has always been more violent and direct, and it's even more so for me." Area A1 of the base was silent, or rather, dead silent. After the new 17th Division entered the base, all the federal forces seemed to have disappeared into thin air, and all the heavy weapons seemed to have lost their effectiveness at the same time. Director Bailey looked in the direction of the headquarters, and he knew that some people were coldly watching this scene in the dark. He knew that no one would come to save him, and he sank into true despair. Then, he turned around and saw Madman Li's flaming gaze. As if burned by the heat of the gaze, his right hand uncontrollably gripped the handle of his gun, and he suddenly pulled it out and aimed at Madman Li's body. The second gunshot of the day. The muzzle of the gun in Madman Li's hand emitted wisps of smoke. It wasn't to pity Director Bailey, who was lying in a pool of blood on the ground, but to pay tribute to those comrades who should have died on the battlefield, but had died in the hands of despicable people. Chapter 925. Puff, puff, puff. After the second gunshot there was a third and fourth. They were crisp and quiet. The walls of Area Y3 of the base were covered in blood and dust. Including Director Bailey, 7 officers of the Joint Investigation Department who had framed the NTR unit of the new 10th Division had died. The 2 beady-eyed commanders who were in charge of chasing down the lone soldier and causing the deaths of 8 federal soldiers had also turned into ice-cold corpses. Madman Li looked at the 300 small-eyed elites who were either angry, sad, or frightened. He said, "If you don't want today to turn into a massacre, then don't move. Obediently board the ship and leave. You aren't real soldiers, so you don't have the right to stay on the front lines. When you return to the capital ring, tell your highest commander." He continued, "That is, that Chairman Lee Jae-do. I don't care what he's doing behind the scenes, but if he dares to send those officials and you to the front lines next time, I'll kill every single one of them I see." In the depths of the base, in the room that seemed to always be dark, the highest commander of the Federation military front lines, Lieutenant General Hu Lien, looked at the young colonel in front of him with a livid face. He slammed the table angrily and reprimanded him sternly. Using a violent machine to execute high-ranking Federation officials without trial, and 9 of them at once. Where did you get the guts to do that? Li Feng's expression was no different from when he was supervising the executions in Area Y3 of the base. He was still calm and indifferent. Only the clear light in his eyes showed that he had already shaken off that crazy and violent mood. He wasn't interested in listening to the commander's reprimand. His eyes moved around the dark room. He felt that after Du Shaoqing left the front lines, the windows of the headquarters room seemed to always be covered with black curtains. It made him feel a little unhappy. Do you know? If this matter spreads, it will definitely become the biggest scandal in the history of the Federation military. I don't care if you are some *T war hero or the youngest colonel commander, you will be finished. Lieutenant General Hu Lien angrily tore open the military discipline buckle and pointed at his nose. It's one thing to kill those 2 small-eyed commanders, but you dare to kill the officers of the Joint Investigation Department? Don't forget that there are 4 people in there from the Bureau of Proclamation. How are you going to explain this to the Bureau of Proclamation? How do we explain this to the Federation? Li Feng replied expressionlessly, "If Director Cui Zhedong has an opinion, I think he will directly target me and not put pressure on the military." Lieutenant General Hu Lian was suddenly at a loss for words. His fingers trembled as he didn't know what to say. As for why I want to kill people, you should know very well that a character like Director Bailey will only use those dirty tricks to bite people like a mad dog. If such a person stays at the front line, the mood of the soldiers will become worse and worse, and it may even cause a real mutiny. Lieutenant General Hu Lian gradually calmed down. He looked at him with a frown and asked with a serious expression, "How do we deal with this matter next? You executed a government official in public. No matter what, you can't hide it. According to military regulations, battles where the death toll does not exceed 10 people do not need to be reported to the Ministry of Defense, and the rear agency has no right to ask." Li Feng replied. Today, 9 officials were executed in the Y3 area of the base. The limit of 10 people was not exceeded. As long as the frontline forces kept it a secret from top to bottom, it would not be difficult to turn this bloody incident into a surprise attack by the Empire. Lieutenant General Hu Lian stared at his calm face. He wanted to confirm whether this was an excuse that he had thought of beforehand, or if it was just a moment of inspiration. For the first time, he realized that there was actually such a meticulous strategic ability in the body of this crazy young man. Suddenly, His Excellency felt like Director Bailey was already dead. He silently thought to himself, if the military regulations of the Federation limited the death toll to more than 10 people, then how many people would have died in the base today? Would he have died? Let's not talk about the glory of the Charter. Even if all the soldiers in the frontline forces kept silent about this incident, how are you going to make those 300 small-eyed soldiers shut up? The Special Forces of Small-Eyed Soldiers belong to the 1st Military Region. We all know who these people belong to. After knowing the truth about the explosion of the ancient bell, Madman Li no longer called that person father. After a moment of silence he said, "Chairman Li Jiedu can make them shut up. I believe that President Pabre also doesn't want the media to know about this incident. As for you, Mr. General, now that Su Lu is no longer in the army, I am the only hero. If the military doesn't protect me, who will they protect?" Li Feng said, "To be more precise, the military would rather protect me than you. So if you want to protect yourself, you must first protect this incident. As for how to make the frontline forces forget about what happened today, I'll leave it to you." Lieutenant General Hu Lian's beard trembled slightly, representing the anger in his heart. As the highest commander in the Federation's frontline, he did not find the slightest bit of respect or even equality in the tone of this young commander in front of him. This young man's attitude was as if he was the commander. However, he could not be angry because the bloody incident caused by the new 17th Division did not involve the headquarters. If the new 17th Division or Madman Li insisted on finding out who was responsible, how could he and the headquarters stay out of it? I've said before that the army cannot be in chaos, so this incident will not involve you. However, I think today's incident should wake you up a little. Su Lu has returned to the Federation. Madman Li detonated a bomb without any warning. He stared at Lieutenant General Hu Lian, whose expression changed drastically, and said, "A lot of things will happen in the capital ring. Those things are not something you can get involved in." Lieutenant General Hu Lian frowned and did not say anything. Madman Li looked at him and said with slight mockery, "If you had the right to get involved in those things, Commander Shaoqing would not have been transferred back by His Excellency the President. Huai Chaosher definitely knows about this. The Empire's army will definitely not let go of this opportunity, so your current mission is to command the army and prepare for another battle with the Empire's army." Li Feng said, "And my mission is to fight the Empire's army under your leadership, and at the same time, crush all the bugs that come from the rear to cause trouble." Lieutenant General Hu Lian knew that this was the condition the other had proposed. After a long period of silent consideration, he slowly nodded. Perhaps there really was a wall in the world that could block out all the gales, but there was definitely no secret that could be hidden forever, at least for Lee Jae-do, who controlled all the secret organizations of the Federation government. In less than 2 hours after the cold-blooded shooting incident on planet Mo, the detailed report of the incident had already been delivered to the table in front of him. In the report, the details of the incident were described in an extremely objective and calm manner, as if the narrator was on the scene, or even one of the people involved. This was the work requirement that Lee Jae-do had for the Joint Investigation Department. He believed that this objectivity had nothing to do with the person involved being his own son. The slightly cold coffee was still rippling in the porcelain white cup. Lee Jae-do walked to the window and looked at the cold scenery of the capital. Looking at the leaves swaying under his feet after the rain, a self-mocking smile appeared on his calm face. The incident report was suppressed by him. Except for His Excellency the President, no one in the capital ring knew what his own son had done at the front line. There might be rumors after the incident, but so what? Because I'm your father, you can't kill me to avenge Commander Zhong, so no matter what you do, I have to cover it up for you, because you're my son. Lee Jae-do looked out of the window calmly. Thinking of his son who he had not seen for 3 years, countless light years away, he sighed silently in his heart. The major battle at the front line has ended. The battle at the Strait on planet Mo was a complete victory. Colonel Li Feng, who is that madman Li, fought particularly fiercely. The only bad news is that the team of the Joint Investigation Department stationed at the front line was ambushed by a special force of the Empire in the Southwest War Zone. 7 senior officials and 2 field commanders were killed. Speaking of which, these people were all my colleagues. They were too unlucky to encounter such an incident on the first time the department went to the front line. It had been more than 3 years since he was transferred from the Research Institute to the Joint Investigation Department, but Chen Yijiang still maintained that wooden look. He took a sip of coffee, looked at the 2 people across the table, and said, "I heard that because of this reason, the frontline command was very dissatisfied with the Small Eyes team and drove them all back. Thank you for telling us this news. Speaking of which, you arrested me for treason, but you couldn't produce any evidence. How long are you going to lock us up? We're not allowed to contact the outside world, and we're not even allowed to read the newspapers. We can only listen to you tell us these stories every day." Sitting across the table were Chief Editor Bob and Reporter Wood. Wood angrily rubbed his tangled curly hair and complained incessantly, while Chief Editor Bob was concentrating on tasting his coffee, enjoying it very much. Chen Yijiang pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose and said slowly, "That money has corrupted the middle and lower structure of the government and the entire political environment. At this time, you still want to speak for them. I don't understand." Wood leaned his body on the chair and looked at him mockingly. "Does criticizing the government mean that you're speaking for those big families? But Mr. President and the government always want to do something good. They want to change the current decadent Federation status quo and achieve true democracy." What is true democracy? Is it the democracy that those thugs in South Kazhou want to kill your whole family? Wood's harsh and vicious tone made Chen Yijiang very uncomfortable. Although this kind of chat over coffee every few days had been done many times, it was still in a state where no one could convince the other. You think that the election under the control of the big families represents true democracy? The Federation needs unity the most now. What Mr. President needs most now is support, not doubt. If we don't unite, how can we win this war with the Empire? If the government doesn't use these strong means, how can the entire political machine operate well and support this war? The body of the Federation has decayed too much. If we don't use a sharp knife, how can we cut off the rotten flesh and restore health? Chapter 926. Wood mocked with a smile. You seem to have memorized more and more political terms after a few chats. You seem to have read Mr. President's speech many times, haven't you? Chen Yijiang scratched his head embarrassedly and said, Yes. Wood mocked, Pabre is quite fast with the knife. He's not worried that he'll cut off the good meat that isn't abscesses anyway. Chen Yijiang hesitated for a moment and said, There are always some inevitable sacrifices. Bob had been drinking his coffee in silence and with a smile. After hearing this, the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He put down the coffee cup and said softly, This has been repeated many times. An involuntary sacrifice can't be called a sacrifice. It can be called being sacrificed or murder. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Chen Yijiang got off work. Bob and Wood looked at the raindrops and body pieces on the window with ugly expressions. The light in the room suddenly brightened up and shone on the faces of the two reporters. Every wrinkle and the tiniest spot were illuminated clearly. It was not until now that the haggard and exhausted faces could be seen clearly. Having been restricted by the Federation government for more than a month, the life of a prisoner was definitely not the luxurious afternoon tea time that it used to be. For people with strong enough minds, their bodies were on the verge of collapse. Behind the unusually bright light that made it impossible for people to get rid of their tiredness through drowsiness were several officers of the Joint Investigation Department in black formal suit. Their faces could not be seen clearly, only vague outlines could be seen, and the cold and sharp sound of metal grinding could be heard. Citizen number SL654678932153 Bob. Citizen number SL655608352465 Wood. According to Article 4, Section 77 of the Patriot Act, your detention will be extended by 7 days. The Joint Investigation Department has completed this reading in accordance with the Special Authority Act and the authorization of the Bureau of Proclamation. Wood covered his eyes with his hands and roared angrily, Why? The black shadow behind the light replied without any emotion, Due to the seriousness of the suspected crime and the complexity of the investigation, the suspect is extremely uncooperative, so we need to extend the detention time to complete the investigation. Wood angrily grabbed his tangled curly hair and slammed the table, shouting, Do you want to keep us locked up like this forever? The black shadow replied, Of course not. According to the Special Authority Act, the maximum detention period of the Joint Investigation Department will not exceed 1 year. Wood fell into silence. He rubbed his sunken eyes and no longer spoke. The official in a black suit sat down. His eyes fell on Wood's thin face along with the dazzling incandescent light. He took out an electronic notebook and asked in a deep voice, Regarding the special report in the Capital Special District Daily, how much money did you personally receive from the Sanlin United Bank? There was no answer, only silence. Reporter Wood, your annual salary is more than 10 times the average salary of the Journalists' Union in the 70 years of the constitutional calendar. How do you explain this? Can we interpret this as a transfer of benefits from the Sanlin United Bank to you? This question could be answered. Wood was the only reporter in the Federation who could use a group of entertainment paparazzi to dig out so many secrets of Senator Macklin. Naturally, he was qualified to receive the highest level of salary. However, Chief Editor Bob and Wood had answered this question too many times. They knew that it was meaningless, so they still remained silent. Chief Editor Bob, the next question is directed at you. Among all the chief editors of the big newspapers on Old Newspaper Street, you are the only one who does not own a share in the newspaper. Why? There are 3 unnamed shareholders of the Capital Special District Daily. Are they your agents? What are you trying to hide? The high salary was bribed by the rich, but not having a share in the newspaper was considered a conspiracy. No explanation was needed. The Federation government did not need their explanation at all. They only needed them to admit their guilt, so they still remained silent. The two of you are famous in the Federation's news industry. I have always respected you, but I did not expect that you would betray your conscience for money. The official behind the light said sarcastically, "But please rest assured that the Joint Investigation Department has never used torture to extort confessions. I'm going to have a cup of coffee. Do you want to listen to a song?" The song was a dance song, but it was not graceful. The electronic noise blended in a very narrow range. If they heard this dance song on the street, Bob and Wood would at most smile with a coarse tobacco and laugh at each other's taste in their hearts. However, when the dance song was played at a volume beyond the human endurance, it became the most unbearable torture. The music had just started, and the volume was not turned up to the maximum. The officials had not yet walked out of the interrogation room. Like a good student who loved to show off, Reporter Wood raised his right hand high and shouted, "I admit it! I admit!" Beside him, Editor-in-Chief Bob, who had an extremely complicated expression on his face, raised his left hand and shouted, "I raised my hand first. I admit that we did accept the black money from the Sanlin United Bank and deliberately framed the president." After saying this, the two of them looked at each other and saw the fear in each other's eyes. The so-called true warriors would never look at a stone in front of them and kick it. They would rather take a detour. This was what they thought. Where is the money? Through which channel was it transferred? Where did you meet the people related to the Lee family? When? Bob looked at Wood, thinking that he was the most famous reporter in the Federation's news industry. He wrote quickly and carefully. This difficult task could only be handed to him. Wood swallowed hard and tiredly held his forehead, trying to make up a perfect story that would not be easily exposed. However, the most important problem was that the two of them did not accept bribes from the Sanlin United Bank at all. They did not even meet with the people of the Lee family in private. The Joint Investigation Department would investigate all the clues, and if there was nothing, it would not become a real thing. The official in black looked at the two of them and sneered. He walked out of the interrogation room, and the dance song, which was more terrible than the noise, became louder and louder. Bob and Wood looked at each other and confirmed that the Federation government did not want to hear too much at all. They only wanted to torture themselves. They could not help but smile bitterly. The seemingly cheerful and witty life of a prisoner was, in fact, full of endless pain. In the noise, the two best reporters of the Federation held their heads with pale faces and collapsed in the chair in pain. They knew that the dance song would stop in half an hour. At that time, there would not be any injuries on their bodies. Even a lawyer would not have any way to complain to the government on their behalf. A thin plastic bag covered the head. The deformed face inside opened its mouth and breathed in panic, but could only breathe the air that came out of its lungs. It became more and more turbid and lifeless. The man whose head was covered by the plastic bag struggled in pain, but there was no way to break the high-strength plastic rope tied to his limbs. There was no way to escape the control of the men around him. Only when he was about to suffocate to death was the plastic bag taken off, and then a basin of cold water poured over him. Compared to the experience of Bob and Wood, the scene that happened in the secret interrogation room of the Federation Investigation Department of a state in S1 was obviously more cruel and cold-blooded. The man who was soaked in pain coughed and gasped. Like a fish that had been fished out of a pond, he stared at the picture in front of him that he had seen countless times. He cried and said, "Yes, yes, I remember. He was talking to this person in the corner of the reception party for half a day." The official holding the picture smiled and patted his face. He walked to the interrogation room next door and looked at the woman behind the table who was in her 30s. There were traces of tears on her face. He said softly, "Your husband's closest colleague has admitted to that matter. Do you have anything to add?" In the 37th constitutional era, the Empire had quietly planted several seeds in the soil of the Federation. The most famous of them were, of course, Sulu and Macklin. Other than them, there was also an intelligence officer named Hiyu. Because according to the investigation of the Federation, It was he who gave the top-secret itinerary of the ancient clock to the Empire, which eventually led to the explosion. In other words, this seed of the Empire was the most important person in the death of Zhong Shouhu. However, the truth was, before he was arrested by the hardliners of the federal military, He Yu didn't even know that he was from the Empire. At that time, he was 36 years old. He had a waitress wife and a cute 4-year-old daughter. At this time, the woman behind the table in the interrogation room was He Yu's wife, Rosie. She stared at the official with frightened eyes and said in a trembling voice, "I don't know. I don't know anything. I have never seen the person in the picture." The official's face quickly darkened. He slammed the table and shouted, "What are you trying to hide? Are you colluding with the Empire?" Rosie waved her hands in panic and said, "No, I have never seen anyone from the Empire in my life. How could I collude with someone from the Empire?" "Liar," the official said coldly, "your husband, He Yu, is from the Empire. How can you say that you have never seen anyone from the Empire?" Hearing that name, Rosie was very sad. She shouted in pain, "It's not like that. When I met Yu, he was not from the Empire, nor was he a spy. He just liked to eat my food. But he is a spy from the Empire." The official coldly and mercilessly tore apart the woman's emotions. He said, "The question now is, who exactly awakened this spy of the Empire and ordered him to do such an ugly thing? That damned newspaper said that the person was Shimanjin. Those idiots in society actually believed this. They didn't think about it. How could the great and invincible officer of the Iron 7th Division, the trusted subordinate of General Shaoqing, collude with someone from the Empire?" The official's voice was cold and intrusive. He stared into the woman's eyes and said, "If you don't identify the real mastermind behind this, the Iron 7th Division, General Shaoqing, and even Mr. President will be humiliated because of this." Rosie didn't get any answer. She just trembled. She vaguely felt that this matter was very scary, but she didn't know what to say. Chapter 927. The official lost his patience, or rather, he could not be bothered to waste any patience on this woman who had no background and was now being looked at strangely by everyone around her. He raised his right arm and slapped her hard across the face. A crisp slap sounded. Rosie covered her red cheeks and cried painfully, "Please let me go. I really don't know anything. My daughter is still very young. She will be scared if she waits for me at home alone. Even if a little imperial brat starves to death at home, probably no neighbors will call the police, and no one will be kind enough to enter through the window to take a look." The official slowly raised his eyebrows and expressed his sympathy with a sigh. As he sighed, it was as if a picture of a sick and weak little girl lying in a damp blanket appeared. In the end, she turned into a withered corpse. The eyes of the short corpse were deeply sunken, and some unknown worm was crawling in and out of them. Rosie clearly knew that this scene was impossible, but she was still provoked to the brink of insanity by the other party's seemingly sympathetic but incomparably vicious words. Her voice trembled as she muttered, "Impossible, impossible. She can find her own food at 7 years old." A long silence to let the fear fester was a very common and effective interrogation technique. The official calmly looked at the woman who had lost control of her mind. He slowly lowered his head and whispered in her ear like a demon, "You want to see your lovely daughter? You want to go home and take care of your sick daughter? You want to make a bowl of hot food for her? You need to seriously recall if your husband, He Yu, met this person a few years ago." The printed photo was placed on the table in front of Rosie. The photo was clearly taken by a surveillance camera. It was a bit blurry, but it was still possible to tell that it was from a banquet. The exact date and time were written on the bottom right corner. In the photo, a certain officer who exuded a sinister aura from head to toe was brushing shoulders with He Yu, who was wearing a captain's uniform. Their heads were slightly tilted down. Perhaps it was unintentional, but it could also be interpreted as them whispering something. Rosie stared at the man in the photo, trying hard to recognize him. She noticed that although he was wearing a military uniform, there was no epaulet. "I really don't know this man. Think about it carefully." The official put his arm around her trembling shoulders, smiled slightly and gently said, "It was the autumn of the 67th year of the constitutional calendar, the inauguration banquet of the director of the 1st Military Region's electronics branch. The man who was talking to your husband was working in the branch at that time, and after the banquet, he came to your house and gave you a precious pearl necklace as your wedding gift. Do you remember?" The waitress, Rosie, could vaguely guess what the officials wanted to do. She was a kind woman, and she felt cold all over. She really did not want to follow the orders of the officials and frame a man she did not know. However, the whole night of interrogation had pushed her to the brink of a mental breakdown. Her longing for her daughter and her greatest fear made it impossible for her to say anything to object. She could only nod dumbly and mumble in a trembling voice, "There is no pearl necklace at home. This can naturally be found in your house. But what is this man's name?" "His name is Li Xiaodong." The official silently looked at the woman, neurotically repeating the name that was so unfamiliar to him just now. He knew that this matter was finally settled, and his mood suddenly relaxed. He smiled and rubbed the space between his eyebrows and ordered his subordinates, arrange for the witness to take a bath, put on some light makeup, and then make a formal statement. In the eyes of many colleagues and students, Qian Chengtong was a very outstanding person. He was admitted to Yue University with the 7th highest score in Li Mingzhou's joint examination, and then he became a professional researcher. Because of his excellent grades, he was specially recruited by the principal to be an associate professor, and his future was bright. However, with the appearance of a post in Yue University's forum, his excellent reputation was covered with a thick layer of dust. Whether he was looking for information in the campus library's H section, eating in the porridge shop under the girls' dormitory in the Plum Garden, or even in a daze by the Rose River, he could feel the strange gazes behind him, hear the mocking comments and even vicious curses. Because of that post that was pinned to the top, it used unquestionable evidence to expose that when he was in high school, he started receiving funding from the Xiao Shu Foundation. The Xiao Shu Foundation was a very respected large foundation in the past Federation. However, with the start of the liquidation of the 7 great families by the Federation's government, under the deliberate instigation of countless news media, everyone knew that the Xiao Shu Foundation was backed by the Tai family. They confirmed that this foundation waived checks, bribed outstanding people from all walks of life, and infiltrated the government, large enterprises, and even the military. It was a complete and utter conspiracy. Even Zhou Yu, whom Du Shaoqing admired greatly, was almost quarantined and investigated by the government because he received funding from the Xiao Shu Foundation. Moreover, Qian Chengtong was only an ordinary associate professor in Yue University. He did not know that the principal could help him deal with the investigation by the government, but he could not prevent many people in the university from treating him as a lackey of the 7 great families. Qian Chengtong had heard a lot of dirty words and seen a lot of different kinds of provocations. He had been silently enduring it alone. Occasionally, he would use his fingertips to push up the black-rimmed glasses on the bridge of his nose. He would stare blankly at the other party and then leave with his body bent. Today, after class, Associate Professor Qian Chengtong was surrounded by more than 10 agitated students. Among them, a seemingly weak male student pushed him violently against the wall and said fiercely, "Qian Chengtong, your attitude is very dishonest. Do you think that by remaining silent, you can make us forget about the filth on your body? Don't forget that you are spending the money of the 7 great families, and this money is all from the poor people at the bottom of the Federation. Your degree, your position as associate professor, and even the clothes you are wearing are all stained with blood. Qian Chengtong pushed up his glasses and stood silently against the wall. He did not say anything to defend himself, nor did he admit that he had committed any unforgivable crimes. A more gentle student advised, "Professor Qian, as long as you are willing to participate in the meeting tonight, and use your personal experience to expose the dark secrets of the Xiao Shu Foundation, and tell the students who are still deceived what kind of sinister intentions those big families have, we are willing to accept you back into the right life and admit that you are an excellent lecturer." Qian Chengtong looked at the honest male student outside the crowd and recognized that he had once taught his engineering principles class. He smiled slightly to express his gratitude and trust, but still did not open his mouth to accept the request of these students. The silence angered the students, especially a female student who was staring at him stubbornly with her thin lips pursed. She excitedly reprimanded, "Qian Chengtong, don't you know what kind of bastards those big families are? They have been secretly controlling the Federation for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. They also want to control you and me, who are free. They are like demons in the night. What is the Xiao Shu Foundation funding you for? You have to tell us honestly. The big boss behind this evil foundation is the bloody queen of the Tai family. Do you know how many wild horses she has raised in the back mountain of Macho? How much beef does she eat every day? How many accomplices does she have in the government? How many justice lawyers and prosecutors have been secretly persecuted by her? That woman actually dares to threaten the government with the crystal mine, and even wants to interfere in this just war." The agitated female student spoke until her voice was hoarse, blue veins popping out, and even had an inexplicable crying tone. She pursed her thin lips and shouted, "You still don't admit your mistake." Qian Chengtong looked at this face that was distorted because of excitement, anger, and grief. He pushed up his black-rimmed glasses and smiled. The agitated female student was called Lin Chire. She was a famous campus movement leader at the Rose River School and a fanatical supporter of President Pabre. She was quite pretty, and 2 years ago she had written a love letter to him. But Qian Chengtong did not like her. It had nothing to do with the relationship between a teacher and a student. It had nothing to do with her delicate appearance. He did not like the overly passionate emotions in her love letter. He did not like the aura between her eyebrows. He did not like her neurotic narcissistic smile from time to time. In short, he just did not like her. So he rejected her. After that, Lin Chire participated in the election for the president of the student council, but failed. She also failed in the election for the president of the Department of Student Council. Until the last year, she became more and more excited at various gatherings on campus. She seemed to have suddenly found a stage for her to shine, and instantly became a so-called influential figure. Qian Chengtong quietly looked at her fanatical performance and remembered the equally fanatical words in the love letter. He could not help but smile and say, "I won't admit my mistake." When the students who were besieging him heard him speak, they became a little quieter. Qian Chengtong pushed up his black-rimmed glasses, looked at the students and said softly, "I don't know who the bloody queen is that student Lin is talking about. As for those accusations, they should be completed by the judicial authorities, not by newspaper reporters." After a pause, he continued calmly, "If student Lin is referring to Lady Tai, I have to say that I have never seen a big shot like Lady Tai. Yes, I did accept funding from the Xiao Shu Foundation, and I signed an agreement promising that after graduation, under the same conditions, I would have priority to work for the foundation." The students began to become restless. Associate Professor Qian Chengtong laughed at himself and said, "Why did you accept funding from the Xiao Shu Foundation? Of course, it's meaningless to say that I don't know the background of the foundation, but even if I knew that it was the foundation of the Tai family when I was in my 3rd year of high school, I would still accept it. Because I was very poor. I couldn't get into the free 1st military academy, and the 2nd and 3rd military academies were not in S1. I was so poor that I couldn't even afford the travel expenses, so I could only apply for Lihua University. The Federation's financial aid conditions for poor students in private schools are very strict. The courses I studied were too heavy, and there was no time for me to work and earn money. Student loans and scholarships. I started to apply for them when I was in my first year of high school, but the loan never came, and the scholarships were taken away by students whose grades were not as good as mine for reasons that I didn't understand. Qian Chengtong looked at the snow hanging on the branches like pear blossoms and calmly said, "I wanted to study, and I had the ability to study well. At that time, only the Xiao Shu Foundation agreed to provide me with a long-term interest-free loan without asking for any reason, just looking at my grades. Only then did I dare to enter Lihua University." He retracted his gaze and looked at the students around him and asked, "If it were you guys, what would you choose?" Lin Chire was sensitive and saw pity and ridicule in his eyes. She didn't know why, but it was difficult for her to suppress the anger in her chest and abdomen. She screamed, "These are all excuses!" With a slap, she slapped Qian Chengtong hard in the face. The sound was like a war drum. Some of the students who didn't know what to do turned the silence in their hearts into shame and angrily pushed Qian Chengtong to the ground. Someone took out a pot of dye from the classroom and poured it on him. Beat to death this unrepentant lackey of the 7 great families. Snow covered the earth in the late winter. The quiet and beautiful campus of Lihua University was occupied by chaos and fanaticism, and the students' slogans echoed between the corridors. "Down with the 7 great families! Long live President Pabre!" On the last day of the 75th year of the constitutional calendar, the northern hemisphere was shrouded in snow. On this day, the Federation Post revealed the contents of the New Year's speech in the official residence in advance as usual. Mr. President Pabre, who had completed the 2nd year of his term of office, didn't seem to be affected by the silent march movement. He calmly, gently, and powerfully wrote an article, and once again used many parallelism sentences, successfully arousing the excitement of many Federation citizens. On this day, the silent march team led by Tai Ziyuan was forced to temporarily rest and reorganize in a gymnasium somewhere. This thin and weak young member of parliament stood in the warm office, looking at the road blocked by snow in the distance. He thought about the shocking news he had just received, and his delicate eyebrows were tightly knitted, as if he wanted to see clearly what the next year's Federation would be like. In his New Year's speech, President Pabre requested all the Federation citizens to endure this period of economic depression in order to survive the several years of continuous space war. He would use unprecedented efforts to reduce the government's budget. Everyone had to make their own contributions and work together to overcome the difficulties. For the Federation's final victory, no one had the qualifications to enjoy special privileges. The Food and Drug Administration of the Federation was a department jointly managed by the government and the Bureau of Proclamation. It wasn't very famous in the Federation, but in fact it held a lot of power. All food and drug regulations, including synthetic meat, had to be approved by this department. The former director of the Food and Drug Administration, after struggling for 2.5 years because of his close relationship with the Nanxiang family, was finally stripped of his position by the official residents because of a very inconspicuous mistake. The new director was Dr. Webb. This doctor was deeply trusted by President Pabre because he was responsible for treating Miss Padella. He also provided a lot of wisdom in the medical reform, so when he took over the position of director of the Food and Drug Administration, he was respected by his subordinates and didn't encounter any resistance at all. On the last day of the 75th year of the constitutional calendar, Director Webb went to Hong Kong to attend an important joint meeting in the snow. It seemed that he was destined to not spend the new year in his warm home. However, in the back seat of the bulletproof car, there was no unhappiness on his face, and there was a very subtle pride hidden in his calm wrinkles. The phone rang. After he picked it up, he didn't speak, just smiled. "Brother, I have entered the board of directors of the Federation Medical Association." Because of the existence of the Bureau of Proclamation, Director Webb couldn't intervene too deeply in the food industry, but the pharmaceutical industry, with an annual output of trillions of dollars, would provide him with a steady stream of remuneration from today on. When President Pabre was at his worst, there were only 3 staff members in the law firm. In addition to the president and his wife, there was also Descartes, who was expelled from the Faculty of Law of the Capital University. The young student who was in charge of miscellaneous jobs at that time finally became the most powerful official in the Federation's Ministry of Commerce 20 years later. On this day, Descartes, the chief assistant of the Federation's Ministry of Commerce, secretly flew to Bermuda. However, the welcoming ceremony at the Bermuda airport was so grand, with beautiful women and flowers lined up to greet him. It was believed that the real secret couldn't be kept. But Descartes didn't mind. The real secrets of officials were always in places that the public couldn't see. For example, that night at dinner, he received a huge check, so he forgot that the check was written by the most notorious arms smuggler in Bermuda. For example, the next morning, he pushed away the naked woman in his arms, opened the window, and saw the beautiful manor that belonged to him. He was so happy and satisfied that he didn't care how many bodies of Bermuda slaves were buried under the blooming roses in the manor. Because of the war, the Federation's economy stagnated and even had a hint of depression. Before the war, the experts who said that the war would lead to rapid technological and economic development in the Federation were now all silent. A worker in S2 Oak State looked at the meager salary in his pay card and could not help but sigh softly. He had joined the 3 major industrial unions, but he did not join the Silent March movement, nor did he join the other faction to support President Pable. He only wanted to work honestly and diligently, and then earn some deserved rewards, and live a small life that was not rich but warm and fulfilling. However, with the price of goods rising so much, it seemed that there was no way to live a simple life. The orphans of East Lenaxi State's Gulu Street had long felt that their lives couldn't continue. Following the shortage of crystal mines and the lack of new mining disasters, most of the orphans grew up. The number of the youngest orphans was extremely small, so the government very simply and directly cut off the welfare subsidies. But even though the number of orphans was small, those orphans still wanted to live a better life. 2 13-year-old youths stared at the black market beef in a dark stall, continuously swallowing their saliva. They wanted to steal and rob, but the scars on their wrists constantly reminded them that those black market traffickers weren't much more loving than the government officials. In a certain mechanical farm settlement in S3, a grizzled-haired mother looked at the expensive high-quality apples. After hesitating for a long time, she bought a few and then returned home with her body bent over. A black and white photo hung on the wall of the home. In the photo, a young Federation soldier had a solemn expression, as if he was still alive to protect his hometown and his elderly mother. The mother placed 3 beautiful crystal-like apples in front of her son's portrait. Then, trembling, she stood on tiptoe and gently kissed the portrait. Then, she sat back on the shabby sofa, crying silently. In the New Year's speech, President Pabre said that the Federation's greatest enemy now was the barbaric and cruel people of the Empire and the families hidden in the shadows. The greatest danger they faced was those sinister ideologies, such as capitulationism, conspiracy theories, and decadent aristocratic hedonism. In order to defeat those seemingly powerful enemies and achieve true democracy, freedom, and peace in the Federation, the people had to consciously prevent the invasion of these sinister ideologies from the root. Director Webb, who had just finished a meeting in Harbor City, sat tiredly on the luxurious leather sofa in the luxurious suite. After confirming that all the attendants had left, he took out a Cinefil pill from his pocket and swallowed it. Turning on the phone, the director changed into a silk pajama smuggled from the Empire. When the drug took effect, he put his hand under the pajama and began to fondle it through the smooth silk. His breath was getting heavier and heavier. As Mr. President's most trusted subordinate, Director Webb had always been very cautious. He would never let anyone catch him in any way when it came to the relationship between men and women. The screen on the wall was playing the thrilling female slave porn, which was enough for him to feel excited, because this was something that the Federation absolutely didn't have. Fortunately, the Empire had it. After a few seconds, the bureau chief let out a satisfied sigh and reluctantly turned off the television. He couldn't help but feel a little envious of the lives of the Empire's aristocrats. Other than silk, they had a lot more. If the Federation's troops were to invade Tianjin Planet, should he ask the president for a chance to become a special governor? The chief commercial assistant, Descartes, was enjoying a medium-rare steak. The Bermuda smuggler beside him said, "This is specially cooked according to Li Nguyen's taste. The sauce is excellent." Descartes pulled a white napkin and elegantly wiped his lip. He smiled and said, "Although our common goal is to destroy Lin Banshan, such artistic enjoyment must be preserved. Everything had to be sacrificed for the Federation. However, every time something big happened, the people who were sacrificed were always the most ordinary people who had no right to speak. What were they sacrificing for? Why were they sacrificing? Everything had to be for the Federation. There were no special privileges. However, before the 7 great families were defeated, a new special class had appeared in the Federation government. Everything had to be for the Federation. There was a need to resist erosion. However, the Federation government led by President Pabre no longer needed erosion. The officials he trusted, or had no choice but to trust, were already corrupted. The Secret Investigation Department relied on the authority granted by the Bureau of Proclamation, the Patriot Act passed by Parliament Hill, and the restrictions of the judicial system. They relied on their own will to arrest all kinds of suspects in various states and used the most effective methods to carry out cruel interrogations. The building in the capital special district was always brightly lit. The interrogations didn't stop every night. The red little eyes painted outside the iron gate for 3 years seemed to be shedding tears of blood because of exhaustion. They were professional, hard-working, and cruel. In the military camp in the southern suburbs of the capital special district, the Iron 7th Division and the 3 rapid anti-tank brigades from the garrison area that were called back from the front line canceled their New Year holiday. They were undergoing arduous training in the cold weather and snow. With riot shields and rubber bullets, as well as the silent steel mechas standing in the distance, the officers and soldiers were topless. They were breathing out hot white steam as they struggled to get up in the cold snow in silence. They were solemn and brave, but they could also be cruel. With the arrival of the new year, hundreds of thousands of Pabre's supporters held grand rallies in various places to show their support for the New Year's speech. The people in the South jumped into the sea happily, swaying their hips and hips enthusiastically. The young students in the North chased each other in the schoolyard while giggling. Round snowballs bloomed on their bodies and walls from time to time, like the New Year's fireworks. They were innocent and lovely, but they could also be cruel. This was the Pabre doctrine. This was the fast knife that Chen Yijiang respected and supported. But who was holding this knife and where was it going to cut? Chasing that faint shadow in the name of democracy, this was today's Federation. A Federation that was completely different from President Pabre's New Year's speech, which made people feel painful and anxious. Chapter 928. As a witness representing the Sanlin United Bank at this hearing, do you have anything to say about the 69 accusations? The magnificent space inside Parliament Hill was filled with a tense atmosphere. However, because of the confrontation of words and evidence, it was not cold. It was the complete opposite of the coldness of the slowly falling snow outside the building. There is no point in arguing against the accusation that was forcefully given. I represent the Sanlin United Bank to express my anger and disappointment at today's hearing. At the banquet, Li Xiaotong was dressed in a black suit. Just like 3 years ago, he still exuded a cold aura of plum blossoms in the snow. The only difference between him and 3 years ago was that there were a few more fine lines between his eyebrows. The fine lines were not because of age, but because of fatigue. When the Federation government under the leadership of Pabre started the war with the 7 families, the difference was the traditional domain of the Li family. The Financial Accounting Act, the Open Fund Act, and the related Equity Exchange Act. Under the strong push of the Parbal government, many bills were passed in the Parliament Hill. Then, the government used these bills to launch a fierce attack on the Li family. As the Li family's representative company in front of the Federation, the Sanlin United Bank, which spanned across the galaxy, suffered the fiercest attack. Just because you don't argue doesn't mean that today's questioning is over. The chairman of the Financial Committee of the Federation Parliament, Senator Ning Zikai, looked coldly at Li Xiaotong and said, "For the past hundreds or even thousands of years, as the only shareholder of the Sanlin United Bank, your family has deceived the relevant regulatory authorities and used mutual funds to change their names to avoid all antitrust investigations. You are truly shameless and bold to the extreme. The Charter's careful protection of citizens' privacy is based on the rights of the vulnerable, but it is definitely not a fig leaf for you financial oligarchs. In the past, you could use the privacy regulations in the Charter Act to refuse government supervision and investigation, but now, according to the Patriot Act, you can no longer use this protection. If by the 18th of January of the 76th year of the constitutional calendar, the Sanlin United Bank still fails to provide the relevant equity distribution report, the Parliament will agree to the request of the Federation government to send the Federation's audit office to the headquarters of the Sanlin United Bank." Hearing this warning or threat, the quiet Parliament Hill suddenly became lively. Members who supported the Li family slammed the table angrily, expressing their indignation at the abuse of power by the government. Members who supported President Pabre waved their arms excitedly, expressing their support. The Patriot Act. Li Xiaotong raised his head with a gloomy expression. He looked at the senator above and replied in a deep voice, "If my memory is correct, Mr. Bob, the senior editor of the Capital Special District Daily News, has already submitted a petition to the Supreme Court of the Federation several months ago, requesting the court to declare the bill unconstitutional. Editor Bob is currently being detained by the Federation government. I would like to ask Mr. Senator, when will he be released? If he can't be released, the Supreme Court will not be able to proceed with the unconstitutional lawsuit, then no one knows whether the Patriot Act will stand." Li Xiaotong stared at the wrinkles on Senator Ning's face and said mockingly, "The Federation government and the Parliament are using a bill that is highly likely to be unconstitutional to investigate the Sanlin United Bank, which has supported the Federation's financial system for thousands of years. Don't you think this is ridiculous?" Without waiting for an answer, he turned to all the senators, raised the document in his hand and asked sternly, "The 69th accusation states that the Sanlin United Bank provided a large amount of financial assistance to the 4th Military Region without the approval of the government, which is a serious violation of relevant regulations. What is the meaning of this? For the sake of the soldiers fighting in the front line, the Sanlin United Bank donated a large amount of money to support the troops to replace the new equipment. What's the problem?" Li Xiaotong threw away the accusation in his hand angrily. The thick high-quality fiber paper fluttered like exaggerated snowflakes on the Parliament Hill. The Parliament Hill was in chaos again. The senators who had just learned the details of the 69th accusation whispered to each other, shocked and speechless. Of course, they knew that the Li family was actually supporting the remaining forces of the Zhong family in the Westwood. However, during wartime, the Li family was in the name of donating to the military. Who could say anything? A middle-aged male senator who supported the Lee family took off his shoe angrily and threw it at the podium. He cursed, "Donating to the military is a crime. What kind of bullsh*t logic is this? The Federation government provided a large amount of war loans to the Sanlin United Bank. Ning Zakai, are you going to accuse the Sanlin United Bank of bribing the Federation government?" Because the distance was too far, the senator's shoe didn't reach the podium. It fell halfway and almost hit the head of a female recorder. The scene was chaotic. On the podium, Ning Zakai's expression didn't change at all. He whispered a few words to the chairman of the ethics committee next to him and then gave the speaker's seat to him. The old voice of the chairman of the ethics committee sounded from the loudspeaker. It was just like the white hair on his head, pale and boring. "There's an emergency. Because it involves the Empire and is of great importance, please allow me to take up the time of this hearing. This is the latest accusation against Mr. Li Xiaotong. I would like to ask you a few questions. First, what's the relationship between you and the spy of the Empire, He Yu? Li Xiaotong frowned and looked at the podium. If it wasn't for the words "spy of the Empire," he wouldn't have remembered who He Yu was. He said, "I don't know him." "I knew you would answer this way." The chairman of the ethics committee looked at him and sighed. "But the wife and colleagues of the spy don't seem to think so." A photo appeared on the giant screen of the Parliament Hill. Photo, pearl necklace, confession. Li Xiaotong listened silently. His eyebrows were furrowed tighter and tighter. His face was getting worse and worse. All the evidence pointed to him being related to the spy of the Empire, and that spy was the key person in the explosion of the ancient bell. Under the current situation, this was a crime that no one could bear, even if he was the seventh young master of the Li family. The hall fell into a dead silence. No one spoke for a long time. All the representatives knew that the federal government was accusing Li Xiaotong of colluding with the spies of the Imperium. It was obvious that the federal government was pointing at the Li family behind him. Such a terrible and irredeemable accusation indicated that this was a decisive battle with no way out. Even the members who supported the Li family fell into silence. The middle-aged male member who couldn't control his anger took back the shoes that the staff passed back. He silently put them back on his left foot and then tied his shoelaces for 5 or 6 minutes. What broke the silence was the ear-piercing sound of the phone ringing. The hearing on the Parliament Hill requested that all communication devices be turned off. However, Li Xiaotong didn't answer it. The ringing sound came from him. After answering the phone, he listened for a moment and then hung up. His face suddenly became extremely gloomy. It was so gloomy that it seemed like it was going to rain. Under the gaze of countless pairs of angry and complicated eyes, Li Xiaotong turned around and walked out of the Parliament Hill without hesitation. Member Ning Zakai gloomily stared at the back of the disappearing figure of the Parliament Hill. He scolded in a low voice. He has no respect for the Parliament. What a bastard! Sitting at the top of the rostrum, Vice President Xian had been dozing off. Whether it was the hearing or Li Xiaotong's arrogant departure, he didn't seem to see it at all. Since Tai Ziyuan decided to hand over the Crystal Mine Consortium to all the people of the Federation, the back of the Parliament Hill had been strangely silent in this bleak weather. As a close political partner of Lady Tai, he naturally remained silent. Li Xiaotong walked down the long stone steps of Parliament Hill in the midst of the fluttering snowflakes. The gloomy expression on his face did not ease at all. Just as he was about to enter the car, several government officials in black formal suits blocked his way. Li Xiaotong, citizen number. You are suspected of He Yu's spy case. You must come back with us for investigation. We are the Joint Investigation Department. After reading this sentence, the 3 officials indifferently stepped forward and surrounded him. Their steps were simple but extremely powerful, giving people an irresistible feeling. You actually sent 3 elites of the small-eyed army to arrest me. Li Xiaotong looked at the officials expressionlessly and said, "I don't know if I should be flattered or angry. If it were any other time, I wouldn't mind going with you, because the evidence you forged is really good. But not today. We are enforcing the law. Your wishes don't matter." The officials shook their heads and then raised their hands to shake off the snow in their hair. The three elites of the small-eyed army, who didn't wear military uniforms, had already violently twisted Li Xiaotong's arms, and were about to put handcuffs on him. Li Xiaotong didn't shake his head, but nodded. A middle-aged man in an ordinary uniform stood quietly beside the car, ready to open the door for Li Xiaotong. No matter what happened, his face was expressionless, and he didn't move at all. He didn't look dangerous at all, just like a well-trained driver. Until Li Xiaotong nodded, the middle-aged man knew that it was okay for him to do it, so he did it. His name was Brother Xing, and he was one of the few fierce people in the world who could make Su Lu feel afraid. When he stood quietly in the corner, he was like a retro long gun that was bound by countless layers of coarse cloth. There was no luster or sharpness, and it was extremely ordinary. When he moved, the coarse cloth wrapped around the gun was broken into pieces, just like the uniform on his body that had turned into butterflies. The three powerful elites of the small-eyed army, who didn't know what had happened, were blown away by a huge force, and fell into the snow in the distance with blood spurting out. Brother Zheng's sleeve was also broken, revealing a small but absolutely powerful pistol on his wrist, which was aimed at the official's eyebrows. He didn't observe the horrified expression on the official's face at all. He calmly opened the door and escorted Li Xiaotong to the car, and then sat in the driver's seat. The tires screeched violently, and the car disappeared in the wind and snow like smoke, disappearing in front of people's eyes. Chapter 929. Snowflakes fell one after another. The officer of the Joint Investigation Division looked at the spot where the car had been in shock and couldn't say anything for a long time. His eyes were full of fear of being pointed at by a gun, as well as some shame. When all these emotions turned into anger, he gritted his teeth and cursed, "This is the capital, where can you escape to?" He took out his phone and was about to report to his superiors to activate the Federation government's terrifying system power to start hunting down Li Xiaotong and that scary middle-aged man, but the phone rang first. His direct superior's voice was still calm and cold, but there was a hint of joy that couldn't be hidden. "Don't hunt down Li Xiaotong for the time being, because the Li family will be finished soon." The Li family's car was speeding on the highway out of the city. The crazy spinning wheels crushed the snow and rolled up white hurricanes. In the back seat, Li Xiaotong painfully covered his forehead. Thinking about the news on the phone just now, his eyebrows couldn't help but tremble quickly. The old man who had worn the black round hat all his life was about to leave this world. At this moment, what he was thinking about was not whether he should compete with Li Xiuzhu for the right of inheritance. Instead, he was worried about how the Li family could survive in this war without the guidance of the old man's wisdom. Behind the highway out of the capital, a convoy of government vehicles was moving slowly. In the bulletproof vehicles in front and behind, the Special Task Force agents were vigilantly looking around. In several dark green military vehicles in front and behind the presidential car, dozens of fully armed elite scouts of the Iron 7th Division were ready to attack at any time. The federal government had officially declared war on the 7 great families. Although this war had already started 3 years ago, the accusation in the Parliament Hill today, as well as that terrifying accusation, had truly brought the war from behind the scenes to the front, tearing apart all pretenses. In this tense situation, no one knew what crazy things those powerful families would do. It was known that in the history of the Federation, there were stories of presidents being assassinated by the 7 families. The atmosphere in the presidential car was not very tense. In the private compartment of the car, President Pabre, who had a dark complexion, quietly looked at the snowflakes that were filtered into brown by the fireproof membrane outside the window. he suddenly said, "the war has already begun, and we are going to visit the most important leader of the enemy camp. If the history of later generations were to be written about this, I wonder how it would be described." Du Shaoqing sat opposite him in silence. His lieutenant general uniform was as straight as a sculptor's work on a steel plate. His facial expression was the same, silent and stern. Hearing President Pabre's question, Du Shaoqing did not answer. Instead, he slowly frowned and said in a deep voice, "I don't like small eyes, nor do I like the Joint Investigation Department. To be more precise, I hate those people." President Pabre quietly looked at his most loyal subordinate, the general he relied on the most. After a moment of silence, he replied, "I know this, so no one mentions the execution on Mo Hua planet again. According to your suggestion, the security of the official residence was also handed over to the Special Task Force and the Iron 7th Division." Du Shaoqing replied expressionlessly, "But they still exist. Mr. President, I have said before that Li Jiedu is not a qualified soldier. Although he is from the Lees of Philadelphia, he is not the war god, nor is he madmanly. At most, he can only be an insidious politician. President Li Jiedu is my most important political partner. On this path, he has given me too much support. I will never doubt his loyalty to the cause. Although I know that you are disgusted with those methods, don't be disgusted with him." President Pabre looked at Du Shaoqing and said seriously, "Any reform process always needs some people to take on the dark work. I can't do it, and you are not willing. He is willing to pour dirty water on himself, which is respectable." Du Shaoqing replied coldly, "I am a soldier. I don't know anything about government affairs, but when I look back at the Capitol ring this time, I see a lot of problems." He raised his head and looked directly into Mr. President's eyes, saying without reservation, "The current Federation government is full of shady deals and a bunch of incompetent trash. I feel that you should be vigilant and change." President Pabre had known Du Shaoqing for many years. If Li Jiedu was his most important political partner, then Du Shaoqing was his last trump card. He knew this soldier's iron-blooded character and his unparalleled loyalty, so he was not angry. Instead, his eyes revealed a look of admiration. "No one can be used. This is the Federation government's biggest problem right now." President Pabre looked at Du Shaoqing and said slowly, "The total number of civil servants in the Federation exceeded 12 million in the 40th year of the 37th constitutional calendar. In the past rigid political system, under the constant infiltration and corrosion of the 7 great families, how many people can be used? The Federation is like a giant battleship, made up of countless small but important components and screws. If these screws have been corroded, then how can we win these 2 dangerous wars? As the captain, I can only find some components that listen to orders in the shortest amount of time and replace them with screws that haven't been completely corroded. At least this way we can still operate this battleship of the Federation." Du Shaoqing frowned to express his objection. "Even if those officials are extremely corrupt and repulsive? Even if they are people like the governor of South Dakota? Even those who dare to embezzle military supplies? Mr. President, please allow me to be blunt. Such officials are not of any help to your cause." President Pabre looked at him calmly and asked, "Shaoqing, with your talent, no matter what kind of Federation government you are under, you can become the most dazzling general in the universe. Commander Zhong suppressed you for 10 years, but he could only delay the arrival of this time. Then tell me, why are you willing to follow me on this dangerous path, even to the extent of giving up your principles in life, and willing to let those schemes stain your military uniform?" Du Shaoqing placed his hands on his knees, sitting in an extremely standard posture. After a long silence, he replied in a deep voice, "Because I respect and agree with your ideals." Pabre looked at him and smiled. As the Federation's president, I once had the unquestionable love and respect of all Federation citizens. I once had the absolute support of that lady in the back of Macho's mountain. I had the loyalty of the army, and I had human elites like you. What can a president like this do? A president like this can lead the Federation to victory in this space war, and obtain a glorious victory. He can make some minor improvements that will make the people grateful for hundreds of years. He can also maintain a good cooperative relationship with the 7 great families. After his term ends, he can enjoy a good and respectable retirement. If this story had continued to develop like this, I could have become the most successful president in the history of the Federation and also the most relaxed president. All of this will be recorded in the history books of the Federation. There might even be an imitation bronze statue of me in Charter Square. There was silence in the carriage. Du Shaoqing vaguely understood the president's meaning. His posture became more and more upright, like a big tree protecting the green hills. But I did not choose to do so. I chose to continue the war. President Pabre said with a cold expression, I chose the battlefield that no president of the Federation would choose for many years. I forced those great families to the opposite side of the government until the Federation was shaken. Today, I could be impeached and removed from office at any time. I could even be imprisoned with shackles on my legs. In the end, I would become the most infamous president in history books, and the most ridiculous president of the Federation. I wanted to use a dictatorship to seek democracy for the Federation, but in the end, I cut myself into pieces. Why would I make such a seemingly stupid and difficult choice? The reason is the same as yours. Because I also respect and agree with my own ideals. President Pabre's words were heavy and firm like a mountain. Then, he suddenly changed the topic and said with a self-mocking smile, But in this world, how many idealists like you and me are there? But I need people to follow me into battle, because these people are at least loyal to me. Then, what can I use to attract them? A war flag fluttering in the smoke of war? Or a powerful declaration on the podium? No, people like Webb and Descartes, once they have power and status, how can they be willing to lay down their heads and shed their blood to fight against the seemingly unshakable 7 great families for their own ideals, or even the ideals of others? What does the Federation government have? I can only use the vanity that comes with the official position, the sense of achievement that comes with power, and the monetary benefits that come with corruption to attract them and encourage them. For this reason, I can even open my eyes and watch as the vermin corrodes the logistics of the army without paying it any mind. President Pabre looked at Du Shaoqing with a solemn expression and said, The hidden strength of those great families is too great. We have to unite all the forces that can be united in order to find a chance of victory. Replacing the old with a rotten new generation of privileged stratum with the old generation of privileged stratum seems sinister and mocking, but you must remember that compared to their predecessors, the officials of the Federation government system have the greatest congenital flaw. They do not have the support of the 7 great families. They are nothing more than rootless duckweeds. After a storm, they will disappear into the greasy pond. President Pabre calmly said, Shaoqing, I promise you that as long as we can obtain complete victory in these 2 wars, no, in the war with the 7 great families, the Federation will immediately welcome a storm. When the time comes, the streets will be clean. Du Shaoqing was silent for a moment and then he replied, Mr. President, you don't need to promise me anything. I understand what you mean. This is a painful period, and I will support you as always until the entire Federation survives. This long conversation between 2 powerful men was very moving in Pabre's eyes. He admired and thought highly of Du Shaoqing, so he needed to unreservedly reveal his thoughts to the other and obtain the other's unreserved support. However, in Feng Yu's opinion, this was just another successful speech by the shoe-polishing president. There was only one person who was listening to the speech, a very important person, Prabal had once again successfully deceived the other person, and perhaps he had also deceived himself. Chapter 930. This was a mysterious manor on the outskirts of the capital. The manor occupied a large area, and the silhouettes of several snow-covered hills could be faintly seen in the depths. Not many people knew who the mysterious owner of the manor was, because there were no words or symbols left on the stone plate next to the iron gate. The fleet of black bulletproof cars and dark green military vehicles were forced to stop in front of the wordless stone plate. Apart from a middle-aged man who looked like a butler bowing respectfully, no one came to welcome them. The iron gate was tightly shut. The president of the Federation came to visit, but was stopped outside the door. This was unimaginable. No matter which region of the Federation, or even Bermuda, no one dared to do such a rude thing. The door opened, and the Special Task Force agent in a black suit got out of the car with an indifferent expression. He monitored the surroundings and communicated with the system through the small white piece in his ear, trying to solve the awkward and infuriating situation. As time passed, Du Shaoqing in the back of the car looked more and more gloomy. Although there was no emotion in his cold eyes, anyone could see that he was about to lose control of the anger in his chest. The people in the manor treated the elected president, who should be respected like this, the person he respected the most. This was unacceptable. He frowned and said, "The Li family is so rude. Do they really think they can do whatever they want with money?" President Pabre's expression was very calm. He put down the teacup in his hand and looked at him with a smile. People who are about to leave this world, no matter how many sins they carry with them, should always have some privileges. Moreover, that old man is worthy of our respect to some extent. The smooth metal wheels crushed the expensive TLF material floor. Dozens of the most advanced medical equipment in the entire universe were quietly pushed away. The luxurious room suddenly became much more spacious. The curtain beside the soft bed was blown by the wind. The spacious environment made the shriveled old man on the bed look even smaller. The old man, Li Yuangong, who was the head of the Li family, coughed heavily and let his 17th wife wipe the spit on her lips in disgust. He looked at Li Xiuzhu and Li Xiaotong standing in front of the bed, and said with a hoarse voice, "I shouldn't die at this time, but death can't be arranged. It's just time. You don't have to be sad, just remember my words." The age spots on Li Yuangong's face were very thick, and had lost all of their luster. As he smiled, they were like little round yellow leaves floating in a pond, piled up densely. "What comforts me is that I can see the true sorrow in your eyes. It proves that I was right to choose you from so many boys to be examined. A real businessman doesn't need to pretend to be cold and heartless every day." That's Du Shaoqing. Then what is a real businessman? What a businessman needs to do is very simple, and that is to keep an eye on all the money by your feet, under your bed, the money now and the money in the future. This is not an inferior quality, but the greatest glory, because only money can promote the distribution and circulation of resources. Ever since the Great Calamity, what we have been doing is ensuring the circulation of human society's resources. Merchants are the foundation of modern society. Anyone who tries to stop merchants from earning money is the enemy of all mankind. That's just courting death. The sparse white hair on Li Yuangong's head drooped weakly like old willow catkins blown by the wind. Although his voice was hoarse, it was still firm and powerful. "I stopped the ambitious president outside and said these words to you because I hope you understand that what merchants need the most is persistence and a strong heart." He slowly tilted his head to look at Li Xiaotong and said with pity, "I told you 3 years ago that if you invest, you must persist to the end. Su Li's matter is too pitiful. You have to know that investing in an emperor is my life's greatest dream. It's a pity that this dream has not been realized until my death." Li Xiaotong knelt down to admit his mistake. Li Xiuzhu also knelt down. Li Yuangong smiled and said, You all know that the ancestors of the clan once invested in Emperor Chong. Although we may have missed an emperor, we can't miss it this time. You have to at least invest in a President Chong. The old man said with faint mockery, although there is no challenge in investing in a president, the clan has done it too many times. But it's always better than nothing. Don't be fooled by Macho's attitude. The reason why the madam did not stand out to support her son is because she still has many cards that she has not revealed. She has the right to wait. But we do not have the right to wait. Our card is very obvious. It is money and only money. Continue to increase the support for the silent mart. Give the crown prince whatever he wants. In addition, satisfy the needs of Lin Banshan and Big Stick Tian as much as possible. As for Su Lo, who announced that he will come back, although I think that this stinking rock is a sentimental person, he is still the crown prince of the empire. Let's just watch quietly. Li Yuan-gong calmly finished the most important instructions and then tiredly waved his hand, indicating that the two most important men of the next generation should leave. The room was filled with a deathly silence. The old man of Liyuan Palace, who was lying on the bed, and President Prabal, who was sitting on the round-backed chair at the end of the bed, opened their eyes and looked at each other. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The war between the Federation government and the 7 great families had already begun and was about to enter a white-hot state. At this crucial moment, President Pabre had come to the Li family manor. This was a very difficult thing to imagine. Because of some very important questions, Mr. President had to come. He had to find the answer before this old man closed his eyes. Mr. President, my family and I have controlled the Federation finance for many years. Regarding this war, if you want to fight, I can fight. In fact, as long as I say a word right now, the Federation finance system will immediately collapse. The Federation government will go bankrupt this afternoon, and the entire Federation will be in chaos. If anyone said these words, they would seem arrogant, stupid, and comical. But the one who said these words was Li Yuan-gong, so no one dared to doubt it. I know very well why you have come. The government accused the Li family of colluding with the empire. I think they don't have the guts to really put my family's little 7 into the Qinqing military prison. The old man of Li Yuan-gong looked at the man in the chair and said slowly, using this kind of accusation to threaten me is an ironclad decision. Before the Li family is destroyed, don't you think this kind of request is absurd? After a moment of silence, President Pabre replied, the end of a war is never a complete extermination. The government and the people only need victory, they need the truth. An ancestor of your family once said before his death, even if a flood surges to the heavens after my death, the government does not want to see a flood surging to the heavens. So, the government can give your family some promises in exchange for your compromise. What promises? Promise not to kill to the last, to leave behind enough funds for my descendants to eat after dividing up all the properties of the Li family? The old man said, you don't understand businessmen. You want to steal my money, which is more terrifying than taking my life. You have to know that the money is mine. It is my business that I am willing to donate it to the army, but when I am not willing, no one can take it away. Your army, you have Du Shaoqing, you can kill all the people in this manner, the Zhong family no longer has a tiger, you can even kill all the people of the 7 great families, but you are very afraid of this kind of scene. The old man looked at President Pabre and said mockingly, because in that case, the Federation left by the 7 great families will only be left with ruins. Are you threatening the Federation government? President Pabre asked with a smile. I am just stating the facts. Li Yuan-gong replied with a smile. Speaking of threats, I believe that the silence of the back mountain is what you fear the most. There was a long silence. The old man waved his hand and murmured in a low voice, let the government withdraw the accusation against Shao Qi. Even if I die, I will not let the Federation's economy collapse. But this has nothing to do with the government's clumsy methods. The old man chuckled and said in a low voice, "How can you understand my love for this kind of system? How can I bear to hurt it? I also don't believe that you have the ability to force these 1,000-year-old families into a desperate situation where they have to sacrifice themselves for love." The old man slowly turned his head and looked into President Pabre's eyes. He said, "In the end, the Crown Prince did very well. Although the impeachment of you on Parliament Hill did not pass the first reading, I think that day will come sooner or later. Could it be that when the time comes, you really dare to force Parliament with your army? Even if you really are so crazy, will Du Shaoqing and the military follow your craziness? Even if all of you crazy people really are crazy, don't you know that Su Lu is about to return to the Federation?" An incomprehensible smile appeared on the old man's face. He said, "Su Li's return means that the little princess of the Zhong family will return to the West Woods. You and Li Jiedu will have no chance, unless you dare to fight a civil war. As for what kind of crazier things Su Lu will do than you, I can't even imagine." The old man from Liyuan Palace smiled innocently like a child. The white strands of hair on the top of his head moved restlessly. He looked at Pabre and shook his head with difficulty to express sympathy. "This war has not yet begun, but you are already doomed to fail. Because you have been walking on the wrong path. To demolish a dilapidated building, one can only carefully start from the top floor. But you have chosen to violently destroy the foundation of the building. Even if you destroy this building, when the building collapses, it will crush all the demolishers, including you, to death." After a long silence, President Pabre replied, "Slowly demolish it from the top. I don't have that much time." "Don't have that much time?" The voice of the old man from Liyuan Palace suddenly became stern. He coldly asked, "You don't have time, but the Federation does. The chair you are sitting in is the chair I have sat in for decades. No matter where I go, I am used to taking it with me. Because the chair represents position. And position represents responsibility." Liyuan Palace looked at President Pabre expressionlessly and said, "As a democratically elected president, you should know that the president's responsibility is not to realize selfish ideals, but to seek a better present for the people of the Federation. You don't even have the right to talk about the slightly distant future." President Pabre slightly furrowed his brows. "The organization of human society is very fragile. It cannot withstand the torment of so-called ideals. You insist on doing this only to satisfy your desire to leave your name in history." The old man from Liyuan Palace looked at him coldly and said, "You don't have the time, but the Federation does. Your successor does. You can completely lay the foundation and pass the bill without being in a hurry to purge it. Step by step, you can take it slowly. You did not do this. You are very anxious, because you know that if you only do this, then it will be your successor or even some president several hundred years later who will complete this mission for you. And you will no longer have the chance to become the most famous president or even savior in the history of the Federation. Mr. President, admit your selfishness and hypocrisy. Perhaps this will allow me to retain some respect for you before I die." President Pabre was silent for a long time. His expression was stern as he replied, "Could it be that you want to place the hope of the Federation's change on the politicians raised by you, or on the aristocrats of the 7 great families like Tai Ziyuan? Why not? History has its own power, and people have an innate desire to betray their own camp. He will do it more smoothly than you. Garbage will never walk into the garbage heap of history by itself. Someone needs to do the cleaning." Pabre replied. Then his brows furrowed slightly. He felt that this sentence was very familiar, as if he had heard someone say it a few years ago. Because of this memory, his mood became a little strange. Looking at the old man's face full of spots, he asked, "Speaking of selfishness, what about you? You are no different from the previous dozen or so family heads of the Li family. Your name will not be left in history. Even the people will not know who you are. You will die with incredible wealth in your hand. Don't you feel unsatisfied and feel that your life is meaningless? The meaning of life does not lie in this. Then what does it lie in? When you die, you will know that life is meaningless. The old man of Liyuan Palace looked calmly at the snowflakes outside the window. He sighed emotionally and said slowly in a low voice, "Life is a meaningless journey. So whether it is you or the man who took off my little black hat, all the things you have done in your life are meaningless." Maybe what you said makes sense, but I always think that since we are alive, we should do something that we think is meaningful. President Pabre replied calmly. Since the beginning of the conversation, it was the first time that he used honorifics to this dying old man. The old man of Liyuan Palace said slowly, "There are two people in my life that I can't see through. One is the man who took off my hat just now, and the other is Su Lo. I can't see through the former because I still don't know what he cares about. I can't see through the latter because I don't know why he cares so much. After hearing your answer, I finally have the answer. People like you talk about the meaning of life because you are unwilling to be lonely." A mysterious smile appeared on the old man's face. He murmured with a sigh, "You are all idiots who don't learn." I am very relieved to have confirmed this matter. After saying this, the old man of Liyuan Palace, who had ruled the Federation's finance and even the economy for 60 years, passed away. The old man closed his eyes. The little black hat beside his pillow was silent, like an old-style oil lamp that would never be lit. It was said that this represented a certain mysterious religious belief of the ancestors of the Li family. Chapter 931. On the last day of the 75th year of the constitutional calendar, Li Xiuzhu put on a small round black hat. The brim of the hat was not wide, but the shadow fell on his handsome face, covering all the sharpness of the past, leaving only calmness and low-key. At the same time, in the distant Bermuda sector, on the most bustling Bop planet, Mr. Descartes, the chief assistant of the Federation Commerce Department, also put on a wide-brimmed hat decorated with orchid petals. The smugglers beside him introduced it to him with flattering expressions. This was the most stylish outfit on Bop planet. Mr. Descartes adjusted the brim of the hat with satisfaction, and the shadow fell on his ordinary face, making him look proud. After the bloody incident in South Cajou and the news channel broadcast the incident, the Federation government began to treat the man with the steep-shouldered shoulders with an unprecedented seriousness. On the one hand, the government stepped up the arrest of Zhang Xiaohua and the others, and on the other hand, it strengthened the contact and support with the local forces of Bermuda, hoping to eradicate Lin Banshan's strong foundation here. This work has been going on for dozens of days, and Descartes came this time to put a perfect end to this matter, to accept the results, and to experience the local customs of the manor. 20 years later, the college student of Pabre law firm had become a middle-aged senior official with a big belly. The only thing that had not changed was his loyalty and reverence for Mr. Pabre. This time, he was carrying out a secret mission personally given by the president, so he should have been more cautious and serious. However, the feeling of being surrounded and flattered by the big shots of Bermuda was so good that he absolutely did not mind enjoying the so-called style, because the so-called style had many other interests besides the orchid petal round hat on his head. The luxurious fleet slowly drove on the streets of Pop Star. The faintly visible ray-filtering membrane above the atmosphere turned the light of the distant stars into a light blue color. The surrounding strangely styled buildings were shrouded in a blue color, making them look particularly strange and mysterious. Descartes looked at the scenery outside the window and listened to the report of the subordinate beside him. He silently sighed in his heart. Legend had it that Bop planet had the most casinos and beautiful women in the universe, but why were there no flashing light screens and naked women on the street? It seemed that because of this damn war, even Bermuda had been affected and had become much more depressed. The Seventh Fleet has sealed off 3 large warp holes in Bermuda that lead to the Federation. It has become very difficult for Lin Banshan's companies to trade with the Federation. In the past 2 months, their capital chain has almost been broken. The subordinate looked at the electronic record book in his hand and nervously reported, "The 3 military regions have secretly sent 2 batches of firearms to Bermuda. Recently, there have been 17 consecutive fights on Pop Star, and Lin Banshan's men have suffered heavy casualties. Step by step, step by step. You've done well." Mr. Descartes remarked with a smile, "I've always thought that a gangster who dares to go against the Federation is courting death. The 2 most critical cargo routes are in Lin Banshan's hands, and the underground control of the 5 habitable planets in Bermuda is still in the fighting stage. As long as we succeed later, the government won't have to worry about this side anymore." Mr. Descartes said mockingly, "Is this the special program that the local tyrants of Bermuda arranged for me?" The luxury motorcade stopped outside the most famous Hawaiian clubhouse on Pop Star. The most notorious arms smuggler in Bermuda trotted to the side of the car, opened the door respectfully, and took Descartes out. The light screen at the entrance of the clubhouse flashed with all kinds of exciting lines. Descartes stood beside the car, frowning slightly, and asked, "Is it here?" "Yes, Mr. Descartes," the arms dealer explained. "Although Lin Banshan has been gone for more than half a year, he left a vicious dog here. In fact, we always thought that the vicious dog had no master. We didn't expect that in the current situation, this dog would actually bite people everywhere for Lin Banshan. As long as you can kill this vicious dog tonight and get the last 2 routes and control of the region, then the entire Bermuda will be yours." The arms dealer humbly bowed to him. Descartes frowned slightly and said, "Pay attention, it's not mine." The arms dealer smiled awkwardly, slapped his face with his palm and said, "Look at my mouth, Bermuda will be the strongest supporter of His Excellency the President." "It's still not right," Descartes seriously corrected. "According to the Charter, Bermuda has complete independence and Bermuda will always belong to the Bermudans. I am just expressing serious concern about what happened here on behalf of the Federation government and His Excellency the President." Dozens of armed men carrying Federation military firearms occupied the entrance of the clubhouse and escorted the crowd into the venue. After entering the venue, all the people with firearms were politely asked to leave. Descartes and the arms dealer went directly to the box on the top floor. Looking at the spacious boxing ring illuminated by the lights below, he shook his head, not hiding the disgust on his face, and said, "You Bermudians are really naive to rely on underground boxing to determine the ownership of the route area." The arms dealer responded awkwardly, "The underground world has its own rules. It is indeed a bit vulgar, please excuse us." The boxing match officially began. The 2 fierce men on the stage fought for less than 20 seconds. The boxer with a black ribbon on his arm punched his opponent's jaw like lightning, then with a small step, he entered the opponent's arms and hit his opponent's lower abdomen with his knee. The whole venue seemed to hear the sound of something exploding. The hearts of the audience suddenly tightened, and they all gasped in unison. Seeing the boxer covered in blood being carried out of the ring, although Mr. Descartes knew that his side had won, there was still disgust on his face. He shook his head and said, "How barbaric." The arms dealer smiled and turned his head. His eyes that were full of flattery suddenly became extremely calm, and he looked at the box on the opposite side silently. He did not tell the truth to Descartes. The reason why he had chosen to use such a childish method to decide such an important matter tonight was that he had been bitten by the dog all over his body, and he was scared of being bitten by it. Although they had the support of the Federation, and although they were clearly about to beat the vicious dog to death, no one would have thought that the vicious dog would actually survive. Moreover, it was fiercely baring its ferocious sharp teeth, with terrifying tendrils hanging from its white teeth. The man in the box on the opposite side felt the gaze from the opposite side. He slowly narrowed his eyes and took off the bandage on the gunshot wound on his right shoulder. He slowly stood up, put his hands on the railing, and slowly opened his pale lips due to the blood loss, revealing his yellowish teeth. He slowly made a contemptuous declaration. "Sanbao, I'm going to f***ck your mother again today." His voice was very soft, but there was a chill in it. Holding the railing, he grinned and narrowed his eyes, like a desperate beast staring at the throat of a hunter, revealing its sharp fangs. From Donglin to Bermuda, Li Wei's arrogance and viciousness had never changed. It was as if he was still the orphan leader who dared to sweep the bell tower street with a military knife. Chapter 932. A light purple shirt, a black casual suit, silky black hair, pale cheeks due to blood loss, added a bit of charm when put together. This was especially so when the corner of his lips curled into a fierce smile, which made many people lose focus for a moment when they saw Li Wei for the first time. Blood seeped out of the wound and dyed the corner of his light purple shirt a deep shade of purple. Li Wei narrowed his eyes and looked at the private room opposite him. He did not recall the specific scene of the shooting 2 days ago. Instead, he was confirming whether the high-ranking federal official mentioned in the intelligence report was in the private room. Back then, Donglin Orphan came to Bermuda alone and spent a few years to cultivate a group of young, loyal subordinates. He also had some fame in the underground world, but he was still not qualified to sit in the front row of Bermuda's power conference. His fame came from the name of the gang and its quirk. The gang was called the Orphan Gang. Li Wei recruited all orphans. Most of these orphans' families died in the continuous Bermuda underworld vendettas. This was a quirk that many gangs laughed at. Although Bermuda was chaotic, there were many orphans who did not have a family. If Li Wei insisted on this quirk, the orphan gang would never be able to grow. However, everything was changing. Li Wei, the leader of the orphan gang, who was laughed at for several years, laughed at the arms smuggler Jihua. No one thought it was strange or that he was courting death, because now in the whole of Bermuda, including the most powerful people, no one dared to look down on him. They were all frightened by this wild dog that was originally unknown but suddenly appeared to be extremely crazy and ruthless. The big shots who were qualified to sit in the front row were the most powerful overlords in Bermuda, such as the arms smuggler named Jihua. Although he was as humble as a puppy wagging its tail in front of Descartes, his name alone was enough to scare all the children on Pop Star to tears. There were a few people like Jihua, and they were all members of the Bermuda Conference. Without a prefix, the conference was called the Bermuda Conference. The Bermuda Star Field was independent of the Federation because of the charter. As a special human settlement area, in addition to casinos, drug factories, and brothels, there was still a need for schools, doctors, and workers. There was still a need for order, but there were no judges and no police. The organization that maintained order and set the rules was the Bermuda Conference. Until one particular spring, a certain man from the Federation appeared in Bermuda. From then on, the meetings continued. Bermuda set the rules, but the person who controlled the order became the underground king. Back then, Lin Banshan came to Bermuda as the son of a wandering family. He observed and prepared in silence for 3 whole years. Then, on a certain night when he was intoxicated by the spring breeze, he suddenly launched an attack and established a new order in just a short month. A member of the Federation had become Bermuda's most arrogant underworld king. This was an incredible thing, but Lin Banshan had done it. Naturally, all the opposing forces in the meeting were speechless and did not dare to speak. Half a year ago, the king of Bermuda had left Bermuda, and the subjects who had been suppressed by him for many years began to have different ideas. In the past, Lin Banshan had left and stayed in the Federation for a long time. At that time, the big shots in the Bermuda Conference did not dare to make a move. Although he was gone, his power and influence were still there. But this time was different. When Lin Banshan left, he took Han Chu and most of his elite subordinates with him. He did not call back Zhang Xiaohua to take charge of the base camp. The king left the palace with most of the troops. Han Chu, who was pale-faced and scarier than the devil, left. Zhang Xiaohua, who was silent and cold but killed without blinking, did not return. These three alone were enough to tempt people. Moreover, they were very clear about the reason why Lin Banshan took away all of his forces. To fight against the Federation government, even if Lin Banshan did not move, he had to do his best. Then, the people of Bermuda could not help but be restless. No one was optimistic about the prospects of Lin Banshan returning to the Federation this time. Against a powerful regime, no matter how strong you were, there was no possibility of winning. More people firmly and happily believed that Lin Banshan could not return to Bermuda alive. What's more, the Federation government had been secretly supporting him. Bermuda was Lin Banshan's foundation. It was the underworld king's confidence to fight against the Federation. If his foundation in Bermuda was cut off, they would become a tree without a deep root and a stream without a source. They would be very weak. This was a very clear situation. The Federation government and the members of the conference were attacking from two sides. The man who had made Bermuda difficult to breathe for many years, even if he was an unclimbable mountain, was bound to collapse. A beautiful picture unfolded in front of the members of the conference who had endured for many years. They seemed to see this beautiful Bermuda star field, after being occupied by outsiders for many years, finally returned to the arms of the Bermudians. 40 days ago, a bloody war suddenly broke out on Bermuda's most important planet, Bop Star. This war happened between the members of the Bermuda Conference and the forces left behind by Lin Banshan. Although it was incomparable to the cosmic war between the Federation and the Empire, and was far less magnificent than that war, it was more sinister, direct, and violent. Countless street fights, intensive shooting incidents, and terrifying arson cases occurred continuously in various parts of Bermuda. Blood was everywhere. In the beginning, the conference achieved the expected victory. With the secret support of the Federation, they continuously defeated the forces left behind by Lin Banshan. They used bullets and flames to arrogantly vent their resentment of being suppressed by Lin Banshan, and more importantly, by Han Chu for too long. They occupied the areas controlled by the other side one by one and used tough and ruthless means to take away the other side's route. Just as the Bermuda Conference was about to attack Garth City, where Lin Banshan's base camp was located, Li Wei and his gang appeared in front of them. The members of the conference did not know why this unknown leader of a small gang dared to show up in a situation where the general situation was already decided. According to the intelligence, this person had no connection with Lin Banshan, but they did not care. In their view, this obviously crazy wild dog was just another corpse. What happened next made Jihua and several other members of the conference realize that they had made a big mistake by not paying attention to Li Wei and his gang. Bermuda was a chaotic world that used death to reason. Whoever could kill the most, who was the most ruthless, was the most reasonable. In the following month, Li Wei used his own performance to prove to the whole of Bermuda that he was the most reasonable person. Although his gang had a total of less than 500 people, he was more ruthless than anyone else. His group of orphans was definitely more ruthless than the gang members in the conference who were raised by money and women. The orphan gang took over the secret arsenal left by Han Chu. Hundreds of members were scattered in every corner of Garth City, guarding every corner, guarding every inch of land. Gunfire filled the sky, and people died at any time. However, those orphans did not seem to feel fear. Even if their abdomens were cut open by shrapnel, they still screamed and rushed out, madly pulling the trigger, using a dense number of bullets to shoot the enemy into a hornet's nest before they fell. Countless bloody small-scale battles broke out on the edge of the city. Li Wei and his orphan gang used the most bloody and direct means to respond to the bloody and direct attacks of the enemy. Many people fell in a pool of blood, but even more people in the conference died. Death was not terrible. What was more terrible was the way the orphan gang led them to death. On a certain night 3 weeks ago, the conference's armed forces successfully broke into a manor in the northern suburbs of Garth City. That night, a bloody purge was carried out. The next day, one of the leaders in charge of the attack held a celebration dinner in his own manor. A young waiter, carrying a tray, was about to approach the leader when he was stopped by a vigilant bodyguard. The waiter smiled slightly, and a trace of ridicule appeared on his handsome face. He did not have a gun on him, only a bomb. Boom! The celebration dinner turned into a bloody battlefield. The bomb directly turned the smiling waiter and the leader of the conference into ashes. The more than 400 guests who attended the dinner suffered heavy casualties. The entire planet Bop seemed to have heard the terrible sound of the explosion. Since that night, the leaders of the Bermuda Conference and all the gang leaders stopped all activities. Under the protection of the armed forces, they nervously hid in their own headquarters like turtles. They did not want their fleet to be directly blown into the sky by roadside bombs. They did not want their mistresses to be shot to death. They did not want their manors to suddenly turn into ruins, and they were turned into minced meat. They also did not want to wear bulletproof vests to drink coffee, only to be chased by a thin and weak newspaper boy who looked less than 15 years old when he suddenly pulled out a kitchen knife to kill them. They were cut until they were bleeding all over, with shredded flesh hanging from their buttocks. After the bodyguards pulled out their guns and killed the newspaper boy, they were still crying in shame on the street. These scenes were the real story of this month. There was no doubt that the days when Li Wei and his orphan gang launched a cold counterattack were the bloodiest month in Bermuda after Lin Banshan launched the February attack. Now, no one dared to laugh at the originally inconspicuous orphan gang, and no one dared to laugh at Li Wei's eccentric habit of recruiting members. It was not until this time that many people understood that the orphans whose parents died in the hands of the underworld hated the underworld the most. Without family, they had no love or care for this chaotic world, so even in the face of death, they were not afraid. The leaders of the Bermuda Conference started this war for profit. No matter how many of their men and companions died, they would not be afraid. However, when they met the mad dog Li Wei and the orphans who were not afraid of death, they realized that their lives could end at any time, so they began to fear. These young people were crazier and more cold-blooded than Han Chu, more violent and bloodthirsty than Zhang Xiaohua. When it came to unscrupulous means, even Lin Banshan, the king of the underworld, would never be as thorough as them. The leaders of the conference could not hold on anymore. Although they knew that Li Wei's orphan gang was almost out of ammunition and food, they did not dare to let the war continue like this because no one knew who would be the next to die before the entire orphan gang was wiped out. Under such circumstances, 2 days ago, the Bermuda Conference tried to assassinate Li Wei. After confirming that it had failed, they proposed to negotiate with the other party. This was the first time since the start of the war that the two sides sat on the table to negotiate. It didn't take long for the people who hung a thin rope on both sides of the bottomless cliff to decide the ownership of the relevant interests through the boxing competition. The leaders of the conference agreed to choose this simple, crude, primitive, bloody, and even childish way to decide the distribution of such important interests. In fact, it was very helpless and humiliating, because they were forced to the negotiating table by Li Wei and the orphan gang in a simple, crude, primitive, bloody, and even childish way. The king who left did not leave behind any weapons of mass destruction for the kingdom. Under such an extreme disadvantage, the lone army on the wall was able to achieve such a situation. This was Li Wei's victory, this was the victory of the mad dog, this was the victory of the orphan. Whether it was in Eastwood, Bermuda, or the Empire, whether he was selling newspapers, serving tea, or researching Mecca, orphans were always invincible. In order to fight against the Federation, Lin Banshan had to give it his all, so Han Chu, Zhang Xiaohua, and most of the elites could not stay in Bermuda. Before leaving, his subordinates were guessing who he would hand over his foundation to because they knew what the Federation would do, and they also knew that the Bermuda leaders who had been suppressed for many years had been waiting for this opportunity. There were many guesses, and even in a very private situation, Han Chu looked at Lin Banshan's calm expression and could not help but ask if Su Lo had already arrived in Bermuda, and then reminded him that the rock was ultimately from the Empire. It was no wonder that Han Chu guessed that it was Su Lo, because in such a precarious environment, only such a peerless and fierce person could protect Lin Banshan's foundation. No one would have thought that the answer was a somewhat unfamiliar name, Li Wei. Lin Banshan was the king of Bermuda, and Li Wei was just a very inconspicuous street gang leader. What was even more difficult to understand was that except for a sentence he said 3.5 years ago when the orphan gang had just offended a big shot in the conference, the two sides had not interacted for a few years. They had not even contacted each other, let alone feelings. However, Lin Banshan made such a simple and even somewhat hasty decision to hand over his headquarters, the foundation that he had worked so hard for half of his life, and the most important resources to the orphan named Li Wei without any reservations. As long as less than 5 people knew about Lin Banshan's arrangements, Han Chu had never questioned Lin Banshan's decisions in his life. He could not understand, but he had to obey. He just had some doubts about Li Wei's ability to protect the family business. A few years ago, Su Le once asked me to take care of this person called Li Wei. After that, I checked and found a very interesting thing. At that time, Lin Banshan's explanation was very simple and powerful. To be able to be friends with Su Lo for so many years, to be able to make Su Lo, who never asked for help, rather than owe the Zhong family a big favor, this person is worthy of trust. My mood was affected, so it was very difficult to write, but I am really satisfied with this chapter. It's quite good. It was indeed difficult to write, and if it was not something that I liked, it would be even more annoying. At most, I won't return the monitor. We don't lack those few $100, damn it. There were still 5,000 words to go, and the sky was already bright. Chapter 933. Lin Banshan went to the Federation with his strong determination and strongest subordinates, but left his foundation in Bermuda. He didn't even take Li Ferong, the woman he doted on the most over the years, and his only son that not many people knew about. He was able to leave so freely because in his eyes, although Bermuda behind him was dangerous, it was still considered safe compared to the Federation. However, in this matter, he, who rarely made mistakes in his life, still underestimated the courage of the Federation government and the determination of the Bermuda gangs. Fortunately, he chose Li Wei. Of course, Lin Banshan couldn't just blindly trust Su Lu by leaving all his women and children in Li Wei's care. In fact, after learning about the relationship between Li Wei and Su Lu a few years ago, he had been silently watching the development of this person in Bermuda. Through observation, he confirmed that this person was ruthless. Lin Banshan had always believed that ruthlessness was the most important and the most scarce quality. Li Wei had this, even to some extent, so he was worthy of high hopes. When he first learned of this, Li Wei was shocked speechless. He didn't understand why the king of Bermuda opposite him would give him such an important task, but he knew that this matter was difficult. Without thinking more, he agreed to Lin Banshan's request. He knew that if he could survive, the orphan gang would still exist, and Lin Banshan could return to Bermuda alive from the Federation. He would naturally be able to obtain great rewards. However, the reason why he silently accepted this perhaps glorious but doomed to be extremely dangerous and bloody was simpler. 3 years ago, when the orphan gang was about to fall into the abyss of destruction, it was Lin Banshan's understatement that saved everything. In other words, after angering a certain big shot in the Bermuda Conference, Li Wei and the orphan gang were able to survive until today because of this sentence. For Lin Banshan, saying this was a very simple matter, but for Li Wei and the orphan gang, it was the most beautiful dawn on the line of life and death. Merchants with endless wealth could casually give away a bowl of leftovers to a beggar who was about to starve to death. To some people, since the leftovers were insignificant to the merchants, then their gratitude was only the weight of the bowl of rice. However, in Li Wei's philosophy, the beggar would starve to death without the bowl of rice. Thus, the bowl of rice was a life that you had to repay with your life. The person that Lin Banshan had his eyes on, and the person that Su Lu cared about, naturally had a different temperament. Li Wei did not seem to have any particularly strong abilities, but since he was young, he had mingled in the black market of the mine tunnels and honed his skills in Jianghu. His clothes were covered in frost, and his mind was broad. If he was in the old Tai dynasty, he would be a national hero. When he agreed to this matter, he said directly to Lin Banshan, "If I die, then there is no way to protect these things of yours. Don't blame me." Lin Banshan smiled, his eyes full of appreciation. The meaning of this sentence was very clear and firm. What it meant was that as long as it didn't die, it would definitely protect these things for it. That was what Li Wei said, and that was what he did. Taking the white napkin handed by the young man beside him, Li Wei slowly wiped the blood that seeped out of his purple shirt. Looking at the unconscious boxer that was being carried out of the venue, a faint worry appeared between his eyebrows, and he instantly returned to calmness. This underworld war lasted for a whole month. During this month, his orphan gang lived a life bathed in blood. Facing the joint attack of several of the most powerful forces in Bermuda, even though he and his brothers opened their bloodthirsty lips, revealed their ferocious white teeth, and bitterly held on in every street, they were inevitably forced into a desperate situation by the other party, and were covered in blood. This boxing match, held according to Bermuda's underground law, was the product of a compromise after both sides could not hold on. Being able to hold on for so long under such circumstances, Li Wei should have felt proud, but he was very clear that this was only a temporary victory. With the end of the boxing match, it was very likely to become a bubble. After all, his foundation in Bermuda was still shallow, and there was no real strong person to serve him. Although his brothers were brave and bloodthirsty, under such a square stage surrounded by ropes, they definitely could not be called masters. In contrast, the big shots of the Bermuda Conference had been passed down for generations, and there would always be some powerful people hidden in the manor. Under such circumstances, Li Wei used a large sum of money left by Han Chu to invite 3 powerful boxers from Li Mingxing. He originally thought that he could at least compete with the other party, but he did not expect that the first round of the boxing match would end in less than 20 seconds, and his side would be defeated miserably. The agreement with the Bermuda Conference was to win 2 out of 3 rounds, but the first round was so miserable, and an ominous atmosphere gradually enveloped the entire box. Li Wei looked at the bald boxer on the stage and noticed that the man did not show off after winning, but silently and calmly retreated. The young subordinate next to him said unwillingly, "If Uncle Hua was here, he could break all the bones of those guys on the opposite side by himself." Li Wei narrowed his eyes and looked at the bald boxer in the dark corner. His nostrils slightly moved, as if he smelled the unique smell of blood in the military camp, and suddenly asked, "Where do you think the strongest men are usually?" The young subordinates were startled. Some answered that it should be the Li Mingxing Academy, while others refuted that it must be the Body Cultivation Hall in Feiqing City. Li Wei shook his head and said, "The strongest men are in the army, not in the Federation's army, but in the Empire's army." The young subordinates thought of the 2 legendary names, and nodded in agreement. Only a very mischievous young man laughed and said, "Except for Su Lu and Madmanly, that princess is a girl." There was a burst of laughter in the box, but Li Wei's next sentence made the laughter abruptly stop. The boxers invited by San Bao should be the elites of the Federation's special forces. At this moment, the door of the box was pushed open, and a subordinate with a gloomy face walked in with a skinny man. He leaned close to Li Wei and whispered a few words. Li Wei's expression suddenly became gloomy, and he stared coldly at the skinny man and said, "You want to withdraw from the competition?" The skinny man nodded. Li Wei slowly put the blood-stained napkin in his hand on the table and frowned. He asked, "The masters of the Li Mingxing Academy also know fear? I can see that they are soldiers, very powerful special forces soldiers." The skinny man replied, "I learned martial arts and participated in many boxing competitions. I also killed people on the stage, but their profession is to kill people. I am confident that I can beat them in martial arts, but I am not confident that I will be the one standing on the stage in the end. To be precise, I will be killed by them." Li Wei squinted his eyes and looked at him as if he was looking at a pile of garbage. He said, "You know that according to the rules of Bermuda, you will die if you leave at this time." The skinny man replied, "If I go on the stage at this time, I will definitely die. As for whether I will die or not, it depends on whether you can survive tonight." Then the master said calmly, "Guns are not allowed in the venue, so you can't stop me. I am just here to express my apology and refund the money." The door of the box was tightly closed, and the atmosphere was particularly oppressive and tense. The expressions on the faces of the young orphans were very ugly. The invited master actually fled in the face of the battle and was so arrogant. It was really humiliating. A burly young man slowly unbuttoned his collar and said honestly, "I will go on the next round. Brother Wei is injured. I am the best at fighting. I know that I may die if I lose, but I can't admit defeat and be so shameful." Everyone's expression was frozen, but Li Wei's face did not have any sad expression, not even a trace of depression. He patted the shoulder of the burly man and said, "Fight well. If you lose, we will all go to the underworld to accompany you. Anyway, everyone is the same person. Now there are 5 people in the box. We will all go to accompany you, but I think that if hundreds of people in this venue die together, it should be more lively." Li Wei narrowed his eyes and looked at the lively venue. He looked at the flying gambling sticks and said in a cold voice, "If you lose, I will blow up this venue." "Brother Wei, this is against the rules," a subordinate said in shock. The so-called underworld of Bermuda was a society where the law was basically equivalent to empty words. The most important thing here was the rules. Those rules had been passed down for countless years, along with blood and tears, and had long been ingrained in the blood of the Bermudians. No one doubted them, and no one dared to challenge them. Even Lin Banshan in Bermuda had to show a certain degree of respect for these rules that had been passed down for countless years. This meeting hall did not allow guns to be brought in, and that was the rule. That was why Jihua, a notorious arms smuggler, did not dare to bring a gun. It was also the rule to accept defeat, and that was why the leaders of the meeting agreed to this fight with the orphan gang. That was why the loyal subordinates raised doubts about Li Wei. "People are going to die, why bother with the rules?" Li Wei said calmly, "And I am from Donglin, why should I follow the rules of Bermuda?" The burly and honest man of the orphan gang was called Hu Shi. He waved his hand and refused the help of the professional physiotherapist. He walked alone to the back corner of the ring to stretch his body. He jumped in small steps and raised his hands to warm up. As the strongest fighter of the orphan gang, he had participated in several unrestricted fights and had considerable experience. When he noticed the lean boxer on the opposite side of the ring, he, like Li Wei, smelled extreme danger. However, he was not afraid. Even if he lost and died, including the strong man from the Federal Army and the big shots in the top box, the entire venue would be buried with him. Hu Shi thought sadly. Unfortunately, Brother Wei insisted on staying in the box to not arouse the suspicion of the opponent, waiting for the moment of explosion. Dang! 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 The crisp sound of the antique bronze bell rang. A girl in a long white dress walked to the ring and showed the board in her hand. Hushur took a deep breath and walked to the end of the passage. He shook his huge head vigorously, and his thick neck made a crisp, cracking sound. A palm was placed on his shoulder. The strength of the hand was so great that he could not move forward. He looked back and found that he could only see a wall. "I'll go next," the man said in a deep voice. Hushur looked up in shock. This was the first time he had seen a man who was more burly and stronger than him. The man was like a steel statue, and his muscles were ridiculously strong. A group of men means these are the men I thought they were. Chapter 934. When a computer idiot saw a real, please note that I said a real, computer expert, he would not be too surprised or easily show an expression of admiration, because to him, anyone who could reconfigure the workbench system was an expert. For the same reason, a dwarf would not be too surprised when he saw a giant. He would keep chasing after them, because to him, every ordinary person walking on the street was a giant. But when Gu Shifeng saw Shi Qinghai, she would be surprised because he was a real computer expert. When Hu Shi saw this person, he was also shocked because he was tall and sturdy, but it was the first time in his life that he had seen such a tall and sturdy man. Because he was too shocked, Hu Shi completely forgot to stop him. He looked at the tall and sturdy man walking into the ring and rubbed his eyes in disbelief. The second round of the fight, which involved Lin Banshan's most important foundation in Bermuda, two of the most critical freight routes, and countless lives, officially began. The tall and thin man from the Bermuda Conference was dark from head to toe, like an armor plate that had been roasted by flames. Under his smooth but tough skin, slender muscles were hidden, which was the best physique for close combat. The tall and thin boxer did not know that the orphan gang had changed members, and he did not care about these details. As a soldier, he came to Bermuda with a hidden identity. What he needed to do was very simple, and that was to defeat everyone in front of him. With a whoosh, the tall and thin boxer quickly stepped forward, his left knee hitting the outer side of the tall and sturdy man's calf, and his right palm turned into a knife and chopped at the opponent's armpit. The most fatal attack was hidden at his waist, a hidden punch. The opponent was very tall and strong, and was a head and a half taller than him, but the tall and thin boxer did not care at all. In his opinion, these guys from Bermuda who were trained in martial arts only had brute strength. At most, they only knew some superficial skills. Compared to the sharp killing skills honed in the military, it was like a child's game. So he did not care to hold back, and used his best close combat skills to kill in one blow. At the moment when he suddenly attacked with a finger clenched at his waist, he seemed to have seen the scene of his opponent's throat breaking and blood spurting out and falling to the ground. 3 crisp sounds rang out almost at the same time. The tall and thin boxer's knee hit the outside of the opponent's calf, where the pain nerve bundle gathered, and the knife in his hand heavily chopped under the opponent's armpit. Then his right foot stepped forward, and the long-prepared left fist suddenly struck out. The fist ruthlessly hit the opponent's throat. No. The tall and skinny boxer's pupils suddenly shrank. He didn't understand why the burly man in front of him didn't fall down. His incomparably ruthless 3 consecutive strikes had clearly landed accurately on the opponent's vital point. Why didn't the opponent react at all? At this time, a clear and terrifying pain came from his left wrist. The skinny and tall boxer's face changed dramatically. He found that his left fist, which he was sure to hit, had hit his opponent's chest, which was harder than steel. The moment the whistling sound of the fist wind rose, only a few of the hundreds of people in the venue could see that the burly man simply turned around. It was this simple turn of the body that caused the tall and thin boxer's ruthless 3-hit combo to deviate slightly from the intended target. However, what was puzzling was that even if this person avoided being hit in the vitals, why didn't his body even shake after taking 3 heavy blows? Could it be that his resistance to attacks had reached such a terrifying level? The shock was still lingering in the minds of the audience, and the doubts were still whispering to each other. However, before they could say anything, the following change in the arena made these emotional words instantly turn into a tsunami of exclamations that resounded throughout the entire arena. The burly man who had just displayed an inhuman resistance to attacks displayed an even more terrifying fighting ability in the next moment. At the very beginning, he forcibly resisted his opponent's ruthless three-hit combo because he believed in his steel-like body. More importantly, he wanted to seize the initiative, because he wanted to defeat his opponent in one strike and intimidate the entire audience. Now was the best opportunity. His right arm popped out like a telescopic mechanical arm. His huge palm grabbed the tall and thin boxer's left shoulder like an iron pincer and pulled fiercely. Only a cracking sound could be heard as the tall and thin boxer's left shoulder was forcefully pulled apart. The left arm, which was thicker than a normal person's thigh, whistled through the air in a hugging posture. The tip of his elbow struck the tall and thin boxer's chest. The powerful force passed through this person's muscles, breaking who knew how many ribs in an instant. Puff! A rain of blood fell from the boxing stage. The tall and thin boxer vomited blood and retreated 13 steps. He could no longer support himself and fell to the ground. He gasped for breath, unable to crawl back up. The bloody and cruel scene made everyone present feel an unprecedented chill. There was also blood in the previous fight, but it was far less than this one. The shock brought by this burly man's absolute strength was stronger. The burly man wiped off the blood on his face and slowly walked in front of the boxer. He indifferently reprimanded, "As a soldier of the Federation, you actually work for the Bermuda arms dealer. You are really a disgrace to the army. You actually dare to use the standard close combat skills of the army against me. You are really looking for death." The light shone down from the top of the venue, enveloping the blood-stained boxing stage. It passed through the short stubble of the burly man's head, but it couldn't illuminate his face. The dark and thin boxer looked at the towering figure in front of him. His eyes were filled with panic and fear. He spurted out blood and asked, Which army are you from?" The burly man frowned and expressionlessly walked down from the boxing stage. His name was Xiong Linquan, the lieutenant colonel of the new 17th Division of the Federation. He was the number 1 fierce man in the first 7 group. There was an uproar in the venue. The audience was shocked by the bloody scene on the boxing stage and the cold aura of the burly man. However, the people in the boxes on both sides of the top floor were shocked and guessing the identity of this person. The orphan gang's box was in a mess. Several people looked at the figure in the shadows with excitement and doubt. They wondered who this person was, why did he fight for Hu Shi, and why did he help them? Li Wei stood by the railing and looked at that place thoughtfully. He felt that the figure was somewhat familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. After all, he won. After the end, he would understand what had happened. He narrowed his eyes and loosened the trigger of the bomb that he had been touching. His palm was full of cold sweat. The big shots in the opposite box were shocked by the sudden appearance of Xiong Linquan, but they certainly wouldn't admit defeat. After a simple discussion, they decided to use the last strongman. "I am very sorry, Lieutenant Colonel Tian. Although you are in charge of the safety of Commissioner Descartes, today's matter is related to the interests of the Federation. Please." The official looked at the gray-haired man in front of him and said, "The identity of the opponent's boxer is still under investigation. There should be a result soon." "There is no need." The middle-aged man slowly tied the bandage and turned to look at the official. He said proudly, "Before a fight, I never care about my opponent." The official smiled awkwardly and mustered up the courage to ask, "The people in the box want to know how confident you are in facing that guy." "Confident?" The middle-aged man frowned and looked at him unhappily. He said mockingly, "As someone who has never lost before, my confidence has always been a bit blind." His name was Tian Xingtian, and he was born in the Philadelphia cultivation gym. After being pardoned by the Federation government and leaving the Fox Fortress space prison, he joined the Small Eyes Special Forces and was now the Deputy Ground Service Commander. His confidence and pride came from his past achievement. Tian Xingtian, who claimed to be the third strongest fighter in Philadelphia, had never lost in close combat. However, the moment he stepped into the ring, he suddenly remembered the dark underground tunnel in the Capital Special District 3 years ago. He remembered the fat and tender salmon, remembered the broken helmet and the blood under the helmet, and remembered the Small Eyes man who calmly left without even looking at him. Tian Xingtian's face suddenly became gloomy, and then he realized that his opponent in the ring had changed. Under the dim light, the person's figure was very similar to the man he hated and feared the most. Chapter 935. The lights shone down from the high ceiling of the venue. The figure opposite him was neither tall nor strong, and had nothing to do with the word burly. He just stood there quietly, like a young student in a daze under a tree on campus, ordinary and inconspicuous. But because the figure was similar to the one he hated and feared the most, Tian Xingtian's mood suddenly became extremely bad. With a gloomy face, he lifted the ropes and listened to the starting bell. He walked to the opposite side, ready to tear him into pieces. The figure moved at the same time, taking a step forward in a very normal manner. His knees were slightly bent, and there was a very close distance between his two legs. He made a somewhat strange posture, as if there was an invisible rope tied between his knees. Tian Xingtian roared, raised his right arm like a stone tablet, and unreasonably smashed toward the opponent's head without any fancy moves. For a real master like him, any close-range combat skills were fake. Only strength was the most powerful weapon. The ordinary-looking man standing opposite him obviously had a different fighting philosophy. His feet brushed against the table at an extremely high frequency, and his right hand strangely came out from under his armpit, stabbing forward like a sharp military knife. This was the third and last match, which would determine the winner of the boxing match and the final outcome of the month of blood and fire in Bermuda. However, the two people in the ring were not aware of this. They were not nervous and even did not take it seriously. They walked into the ring full of confidence and made the first move in a simple and even casual manner. What sent chills down one's spine was the scene that happened after that. In the end, it only confirmed that Tian Xingtian's confidence was laughable. This battle-hardened deputy commander of the Small-Eyed Special Forces was known as the third strongest fighter in Philadelphia. When he stepped on the ring, he showed the demeanor of a strong fighter. However, after his first action, he could only do this action forever. His shoulders sank slightly, and just as he raised his strong right arm, he didn't have time to draw the bow and shoot. The ordinary man opposite him had already swept in front of him like a silent bolt of lightning, and then a torrential storm hit him. Meng Qi's fingers struck Tian Xingtian's ribs viciously. He raised his elbow slightly and struck horizontally. Meng Qi took another step forward and struck Tian Xingtian's inner thigh with his knee. His left fist came out of nowhere and smashed into Tian Xingtian's face like a hammer. That ordinary and inconspicuous figure silently arrived. His fingers were like a gale, and his fists were like a shower. His movements were extremely fast, and every movement was so precise that it was beyond the imagination of a normal person. He was more like a machine. This storm of fists and fingers came too fast, so fast that many people felt that their eyes were blurred. It was as if when the ordinary man stepped forward with his right foot, his left elbow and every part of his body launched an attack at the same time. In less than a second, the ordinary-looking man seemed to have sprouted dozens of arms in an instant. They loosened at the same time and landed densely on Tian Xingtian's face, abdomen, and the tip of his nose. Tian Xingtian was indeed very strong, but in the face of such a terrifying attack, he could not react at all. He could only raise his right arm in vain, his eyes wide open in fear. A more accurate description of the situation would be: the third most powerful man in Philadelphia, Tian Xingtian, was beaten senseless by an ordinary man. Pa, 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 pa. A series of crisp sounds, like the sound of firecrackers, were extremely rhythmic. However, because they were so dense, most people only heard a single syllable explode. The ordinary-looking man retracted his foot and stood calmly with his hands behind his back. In front of him, Tian Xingtian was still maintaining his raised arm posture. However, this posture now looked so ridiculous and pathetic. He was like a performance artist who took off his clothes to play the role of a statue, only to realize that his lower body was not majestic. Thus he felt ashamed. Before he could express his shame and anger with tears or expressions, Tian Xingtian's stiff body suddenly collapsed like a statue that had its bottom pulled out. His strong body fell to the ground with the sole of his feet as the axis. His body landed heavily on the surface of the ring, making a muffled sound. The force that had smashed into his body like a torrential storm was finally completely released with this collision. The clothes on his body curled up like burning pieces of paper, and then burst apart piece by piece, turning into butterflies fluttering in the air. Tian Xingtian's clothes were torn apart. His naked body was bruised and swollen. His broken nose was bleeding like a bloody peach. He tried his best to open his eyes that were swollen like peaches, but he could only open two small slits to look at the face in the shadow above him. He did not see the face clearly, but he saw the pair of small eyes that had turned into a nightmare. Furthermore, the small eyes of the other party were definitely not the result of being beaten up. Tian Xingtian's throat made a sound. He looked at the other party in horror and cried like a madman, "It's you! It's you! It's you again!" With the last of his strength, the third most powerful man in Philadelphia could not hold on any longer and fainted. The light from the ceiling still shrouded the ring. Although it was dim, it was quiet. It was as if they did not see the frightening scene from before. Or rather, they did not have time to see the scene clearly because everything happened too quickly. The venue was dead silent. Hundreds of people looked at the ring with an expression of disbelief. Many of them did not even see what happened before they realized that everything was over. The ordinary-looking figure stood quietly on the ring like a student. His hands were hanging on both sides of his body, as if he did not make a move at all. However, not far in front of him, the horrible body of the Philadelphia fighter proved everything. The last round ended even faster than the second round. The difference in strength between the two parties could no longer be described as overwhelming. In front of the ordinary-looking man, Tian Xingtian was like a scarecrow that was tied up tightly. This one-sided and extremely humiliating battle was more like an angry parent teaching a disobedient child a lesson. There was still a deathly silence. Everyone stared dumbfoundedly at that inconspicuous figure, guessing in their hearts who he was. In the box on the top floor of the venue, Li Wei looked at the figure in the middle of the ring with excitement. His hands were tightly holding the railing, and his veins were visible. He thought that he would lose this fight and that he and the orphan gang were only left with death, so he made the decision to die together with them. When he made the decision, he was full of sadness and was not afraid. However, now the situation had changed abruptly. How could he not be excited when he did not have to die? How could he not be excited when he saw the figure that he had grown up with and had not seen for years? In the opposite box, the slightly fat face of Mr. Descartes looked particularly gloomy under the dim light. He angrily threw away the red wine glass in his hand, pointed at Tian Xingtian, who was in the ring below, and asked coldly, "What's going on? Didn't he say that he was the third most powerful man in Philadelphia? How could he be beaten into a pile of mud? What a waste!" The subordinate officer next to him wiped the cold sweat and explained in a trembling voice, "It seems that Lieutenant Colonel Tion's enemy is really powerful. I don't know where he found him." Descartes looked at Jihua and several members of the Bermuda Conference in front of him and said in a deep voice, "Who can give me an explanation?" They thought that it was just a formality of a fight, but it suddenly developed to this point. The huge benefits that they were about to get suddenly turned into a bubble. The local tycoons in the box were shocked and furious, but in the face of the Federation's government representative, no one dared to show it. Jihua looked at the figure in the ring with an ugly expression and said, "According to the intelligence, Li Wei spent money to invite a master of harmonization of energy from Li Mingxing. It's absolutely impossible for him to be Lieutenant Colonel Tion's opponent, let alone be so powerful." He hesitated for a moment and then suggested, "Mr. Descartes, it seems that this matter needs to be considered in the long run. We first have to find out who the person in the ring is." Descartes frowned and did not speak. Suddenly, he said in a deep voice, "Everything must be finished tonight. If you don't have the confidence to eliminate those wandering ghosts on the opposite side, my special forces can join the battle this time." Jihua was shocked and hurriedly tried to persuade him, "Mr. Descartes, you probably don't know the rules of Bermuda. This bet has been notarized, and we are willing to." Before he could finish the words, Descartes indifferently waved his hand and cut him off. He said in an indisputable tone, "There are no rules in front of the Federation government. His Excellency the President wants you to do it as soon as possible. You must do it immediately." In the dim box, the tycoons of the Bermuda Conference looked at each other in silence. They could see the anger in each other's eyes, as well as a lot of helplessness. Descartes leaned on the railing and looked at the figure in the ring. He cruelly mocked, "I don't know if you can still be so cool when you are shot to death." Just as he said this, the ordinary-looking man in the ring raised his head. He looked in the direction of the box on the top floor and shook his head. He had been slightly lowering his head since he walked into the ring. Even when he was carrying out a terrifying attack, he still maintained this posture. At this time, when he raised his head, the direct light from the ceiling fell on his face for the first time. The soft and dim light illuminated the face that could not be called handsome, reflecting the clear and firm lines of the face and the pair of small eyes. This face was very ordinary and had no special features. However, when matched with the pair of small eyes, it became the most famous face in human society. The venue, which was in a depressing silence, became even more silent than before when the light illuminated this face. Then, there was a tsunami-like exclamation. The gambler patted his head in shock and roared, "It's that man!" The waitress covered her mouth in disbelief and shock, trying not to scream. More people exclaimed with mixed emotions, "It's Su Lu! Why did he come to Bermuda?" Descartes stood by the railing of the box and looked at the face under the light of the ring. He clearly saw the other side shaking his head at him. His body suddenly stiffened. The cruel smile on his face had long disappeared, leaving only endless panic. Chapter 936. Hearing the exclamations of the crowd, hearing the names spurting out of countless crimson or pale lips, and then penetrating into his ears like a thunderclap, Descartes' body that had been extremely stiff a moment ago suddenly softened. He almost fell to his knees while leaning against the railing. The arm that gripped the railing tightly prevented the high-ranking federal official from doing something so embarrassing. However, the incessant trembling of his arm indicated that the fear in his heart had already surged endlessly like the dark clouds of the dawn star. There was dead silence in the box. He suddenly turned around and stared at the people in the box with crazy eyes. He waved his arms and screamed, "Kill him! No matter what method you use, kill him!" The people in the box understood and sympathized with Mr. Descartes' loss of composure, because their situation was not much better. After confirming the identity of the man standing in the ring, Not many people had the strength to stand up from their chairs. They were the leaders of Bermuda, but that man was a legend on the battlefield, and now he was obviously on Li Wei's side. Fortunately, they were far less dangerous than Mr. Descartes. The whole universe knew that the person the Federation government did not want to see the most in these years was the small-eyed man named Su Lu in the ring. This bloody war in Bermuda had entered the final stage, and they were about to win, even if it was a despicable victory. Was it going to end because of the appearance of that man in the ring? Countless things had happened in the past 10 years, so the big shots in the box knew how terrifying Su Li's combat strength and tenacity were. They were even willing to admit that they, who had countless subordinates, did not have the courage to fight this man. However, the situation was like this, and they had to fight. Jihua frowned and thought quickly. In his calculations, no matter how strong Su Lu was, he was still a normal person. The local armed forces of Bermuda and the support of the Federation government should have more than a 90% chance of winning. As the most famous arms smuggler in this star field, Jihua had a ruthless heart that the other big shots in the Bermuda Conference did not have. He glanced at his partner who was still hesitating, looked at Descartes and said in a deep voice, "Please give me the command of your special forces, and I promise to kill that man." The panicked expression on Descartes' face relaxed a little as he heard Jihua's words. He praised in a trembling voice, "I'll leave everything to you, Mr. Jihua." Jihua was no longer as flattering, and Descartes was no longer as arrogant and contemptuous. This was no longer the nightclub of the manor, but a venue where Su Lu was present. Just as Jihua was about to stand up and prepare for battle, he suddenly noticed a small red dot appearing under the railing beside him. Then the second red dot, the third red dot, the red light spot was very dim and weak. If one didn't pay attention, they wouldn't be able to notice it in the dim environment of the room. However, if someone were to look closer, they would be able to see that there were two very small ancient letters in the center of the red light spot. XF. Like red ants, 3 dim red dots of light quietly entered the room through the wall. They crawled on the sofa and on the bodies of the big shots who did not notice them. They moved smoothly and nimbly, leaving no trace behind. Jihua, who was about to get up, saw the red light and sat back down in his chair, dejected. Cold sweat instantly seeped out of his forehead, and his whole body was filled with fear. There were at least 3 modified sniper rifles aimed at the room he was in. He had seen these red dots that looked like red ants and knew that they were the laser calibration points of some kind of modified sniper rifle. He didn't need to look carefully to know that at the center of the red dots, there must be the 2 ancient letters XF. He even knew that the laser calibration points of this modified sniper rifle could be adjusted to the point where they could be seen with the naked eye. This meant that the snipers outside didn't care about being discovered by the people in the room and were confident that they could control the situation. Jihua was able to see this not only because he was the biggest arms smuggler in Bermuda, but because he was the only one in the entire universe who had sold this kind of gun. The modified sniper rifle that Jihua called TP was the most advanced sniper rifle he had ever seen in his long career as an arms dealer. Other than not being on par with the legendary ACW, it was enough to look down on all similar equipment. TP was not the standard gun of the Federation or the Empire. It came from a mysterious seller. It was a very honorable thing to be able to obtain the exclusive rights to sell this kind of gun, but unfortunately, Jihua didn't dare to show it off in the past 2 years. This was because he had paid the painful price of the explosion of 3 smuggling spaceships. Those lessons were too unforgettable. However, he was so scared now, not only because he was targeted by 3 TP-modified sniper rifles, but also not because of those lessons. It was because only he knew that those guns were sent to the West Woods, to the old mansion in the Wei 2 district. Su Lu came to Bermuda, and the little princess of the Zhong family should have followed him to Bermuda. Jihua stared at the 3 red dots under his feet and thought to himself, Could it be that the West Woods Special Forces have surrounded the venue? Because of this fearful speculation and the fear of the mysterious supplier of the TP-modified sniper rifle, Ji Hua, who was prepared to join hands with the Federation government to eliminate Su Lu, subconsciously looked at the 3 red dots and raised his hands. The thoughts in his mind were completed in an instant. The big shots in the room didn't know what kind of struggle he had gone through in his heart. They frowned and asked a few questions when they saw him raise his hands in a strange manner. Cold sweat slid down Ji Hua's cheeks. The next moment, he realized that raising his hands in advance to surrender was a wise choice. In the darkest corner of the dim room, 2 faces suddenly appeared in front of everyone like ghosts. One of them pointed a gun at Descartes and said softly, "Everyone, don't move." The room suddenly became tense. The big shots sitting on the sofa looked at the 2 gunmen who had somehow sneaked in. They were shocked and speechless. The door of the room was pushed open from the outside. The corridor light shone into the room and shone on the 2 gunmen. Only then did people realize that they were wearing dark black combat suits and their faces were painted with camouflage dark paint. They looked like real ghosts. In the soft and scattered corridor light, a wheelchair came in with the sound of a motor. A curly-haired man sat in the wheelchair. His face couldn't be seen clearly. Only a very thick shotgun could be seen on his lap. Behind the curtain of the sofa on the right side of the room, the small-eyed Special Forces member responsible for protecting Descartes quickly took out the gun at his waist and was ready to shoot when the light shone on the eyes of the 2 gunmen. The elite Special Forces member made the right choice. Unfortunately, he didn't see the 3 smoothly moving red dots and didn't know that there were snipers outside. A slight click came from somewhere on the opposite side of the ceiling. The TP sniper with a silencer fired from a long distance. The elite Special Forces member by the curtain suddenly bounced up and collapsed in the corner. A moment later, blood flowed out from under the sofa. The big shots were shocked by this scene of death. They tightly pursed their lips and sat still on the sofa with serious expressions. Everyone wanted to save face and didn't want to be controlled by others. However, no one dared to be arrogant in front of a sniper rifle. The 2 gunmen, who were as black as ghosts, did not seem to have seen the sniper bullet blowing up the small-eyed elite of the Special Forces. They walked around Descartes expressionlessly and occupied the corner with the largest view in the room. Holding the guns in their hands, they aimed at everyone as suppressive measures. "Who are you?" Descartes, with a pale face, stared at the wheelchair at the door. He looked at the man in the wheelchair, whose face was even paler than his own, and asked in a trembling voice. The young man in the wheelchair frowned slightly. His pale face was full of hatred. After a long silence, he replied, "Group 7 Da Vinci." Hearing the words Group 7, the atmosphere in the room became even more depressing. Descartes and the Bermuda tycoons didn't know what happened on the Moa planet, so they didn't expect Group 7 to appear here. Su Lu was already very scary. If there was Group 7, which was about to be forgotten but never really forgotten by the world, what would it mean? When Descartes recognized Su Lu, he was about to go crazy. When he found that Group 7 was also acting with Su Lu, he fell into despair. When people were in despair, it was easy to hallucinate. For example, at this moment, Descartes looked at the wheelchair in front of him, looked at the weak curly-haired man in the wheelchair, looked at the gun on the man's knee, and realized that the 2 gunmen behind him didn't pay attention to him at all. If he rushed over to grab the gun, restrained the weak man, and threatened Su Lu and Group 7, he should be able to survive. But why was there such a good opportunity? Was this an illusion? No, he opened his eyes wide to confirm that this was not an illusion. This was his last hope. Descartes trembled and howled. Like a housewife rushing to the supermarket in the morning to buy limited-time bean pods, he suddenly pounced on the wheelchair. Da Vinci in the wheelchair seemed to have expected this high-ranking Federation official to do this. Just as Descartes' howl was squeezed out of his throat, He quickly picked up the gun on his knee with both hands and pulled the trigger without even aiming. A loud boom resounded. The room was filled with the smell of burnt flesh. Descartes' body was sprayed by hundreds of graphite balls fired at close range. He was blown back several meters by the violent force contained in the balls at high speed and heavily hit the railing. Like a broken bamboo, with a crisp crack, Descartes, who came to carry out the president's secret mission, died. His chest and abdomen were a mess. At this time, no one knew if he still remembered the manner and the beautiful woman that the Bermudians gave him, or if he regretted it. The wheelchair came to the front of Descartes' body. Da Vinci spat and looked at the body and said, "I gave you hope, then made you despair. I am playing with you. Let's see if you idiots dare to play with me again." The room was silent. When the leaders of the Bermudian Conference, who were known for their ruthlessness, saw this scene, they didn't have any expression on their faces, but their hearts were extremely cold. Only now did they know that Group 7 was actually so ruthless. Chapter 937. Bermuda was a place where one needed to be ruthless in order to survive and grow stronger. At this time, among the big shots sitting in the private room, which one of them was not a first-class ruthless person who was not ruthless and treated ruthlessness as their livelihood. However, when they saw Da Vinci, who was in a wheelchair, kill Descartes with a single shot, they were shocked like never before. They also saw that the 3 members of Group 7 in the private room had deliberately left an opening for Descartes to give him the illusion that he could escape before firing the shot. These big shots of Bermuda were expressionless, but they had long been anxious. They often saw and even did things like killing people without blinking an eye. But before killing, they had to play with the other party like a cat hunting a mouse. They had to lure the other party into a state of hope and then cruelly drag the other party into despair. Even they couldn't bear it. Da Vinci withdrew his gaze from Descartes' body and glanced at everyone in the room with a blank expression. The big spear in his hand moved slowly with his gaze, and the black muzzle was full of murderous intent. No one took the lead or signaled. The big shots in the box did not hesitate to raise their hands to surrender. Their movements were so uniform, their hands were so high, and their willingness to surrender was so full. In the past, these big shots would never make such a humiliating gesture in front of a soldier they looked down on. They had a sniper rifle outside and 2 guns behind them. Even if they surrendered, they would tidy up their clothes, wear an elusive smile on their faces, and slowly say their willingness to compromise. But at this time, they had experienced too many big events and seen too much blood. They knew how dangerous the curly-haired young man in the wheelchair was at this moment. Because of the rules, none of their subordinates entered the venue with guns, so they had no right to bargain or even pretend to be cool. Don't be nervous. This is a personal grudge between us and the Federation government. As the calm voice sounded, Sulu walked into the box. He narrowed his eyes and looked at Descartes' body under the railing. He didn't show any emotion on his face. He looked at the big shots on the sofa with their hands raised and nodded. If they didn't need to be nervous, then in the joke collection passed down by the ancestors of Li Shaoshan, the owner of the department store in the foothill of the Federation, there would be a famous scene missing, and the students in the exam room would smile a lot more. In fact, when they heard the second half of Su Li's sentence, the expressions of the Bermuda leaders with their hands raised suddenly became very interesting, and the nervousness in their hearts increased a little. This is a personal matter between us and the Federation government. In a literal sense, personal grudges naturally referred to grudges that happened between individuals. The focus was on the individual. For example, so-and-so was jealous of so-and-so. For example, Li Pifu cut off Xiao so-and-so's source of wealth. For example, Wei so-and-so and Shiman so-and-so raped so-and-so's wife and daughter. For example, Li Pifu killed the emperor's master. This kind of gratitude and grudges began to ferment layer by layer until they could not live under the same sky. What would it mean if the object of this term was not a person, but the government of the Federation? This was equivalent to saying that Su Lu and Group 7 viewed the entire Federation government as one person. As long as the government didn't collapse, this grudge would never end. This was an arrogant and decisive declaration of war. The people in the box were shocked by the hidden valiance in this sentence, and then they immediately felt relieved. If they were to evaluate who had the qualifications and courage to declare war on the entire Federation, then Su Lu and his Group 7 would undoubtedly rank first. In fact, this small-eyed man had already done so 3 years ago. Jihua's focus was elsewhere. After a moment of observation, he confirmed that there should be no Westwood's special forces inside or outside the venue that he feared the most. Naturally, he speculated that the reason why the snipers of Group 7 outside had TP-modified sniper rifles was because of the inseparable bridge between Su Lu and the Westwoods, the little princess of the Zhong family. Feeling a little more relaxed, he slowly put down his hands, looked at the other party and said calmly, "Colonel Su Lu, I don't know if I can call you that." Su Lu nodded. "I don't know why you're interfering in Bermuda's internal affairs, but I think you should know the rules of Bermuda." Jihua frowned and said, "If there was a war, there wouldn't be today's boxing match. Since it was decided that the boxing match would decide the outcome, then we have to follow the rules. I respect you and your team, and I hope you can respect the traditions of Bermuda." Su Lu replied, "As an outsider, I respect the rules of Bermuda very much, so we sent people to fight in the boxing match. I even participated in it myself." Looking at the body of Descartes next to the railing and the gun of the small-eyed man in the distance, he continued, "Unfortunately, after we won the boxing match according to the rules, some people didn't seem to want to follow the rules here. They carried guns, and the militants outside the venue seemed to be gathering." He looked up at the Bermuda leaders on the sofa and said calmly, "Since some of you didn't respect the rules first, I don't need to respect them anymore." The Bermuda leaders in the box looked at each other and couldn't help but shake their heads with a bitter smile. The other party was obviously prepared and even had a sniper in the ambush. What could they say when the other party refused to let Descartes go? Su Lu continued, "There's one more thing. Although our target is the Federation government, because I have some relationship with Li Wei in the opposite box, I may have to inconvenience you this time." "Can I have a smoke?" Jihua asked. "Go ahead," Su Lu replied. Jihua took out a thick stick of tobacco with trembling fingers, lit it, and took a puff. He coughed twice and asked seriously, "I have a question. The conference has set up 16 checkpoints and hundreds of guns in this area. How did you sneak in with guns?" Su Lu replied, "This is probably the difference between professionals and amateurs." Jihua put down the thick tobacco in his hand and forced a smile on his pale cheek. He asked, "By inconvenience, do you mean to kill all of us? If this is a war in Bermuda, then I can tell you that this war is over and you are all beheaded." Su Lu calmly explained, "But this is just a tactical term. I never thought of killing all of you. Killing hostages has always been the stupidest choice. I just need you to leave with me and announce the end of the war. Capturing us, or killing us, will not end this war because not all members of the conference are present today. And on this planet, we still have many loyal subordinates who will avenge us." Jihua stared into Su Li's eyes and said, "I know you are very strong, but you have too few people. You, or Li Wei, can't bear the anger of the entire conference after we die. This is the real reason why you don't kill. You can also understand it this way. My team is indeed too few. It is impossible for less than 10 people to kill all of your combat troop." After saying this, Su Lu paused for a long time and quietly looked at the leaders of the Bermuda Conference on the sofa. When the air in the box was about to condense, he continued in a serious tone, "But you know who I am." The room was silent. Everyone listened to his speech in silence. I dared to break into the conference with 6 team members and kidnap you. I dare to let you go. I am not afraid of you going back on your words. You don't have to be afraid. If you suddenly go back on your words after the war is over, you may be able to capture Garth City, take away all of Lin Banshan's assets, and kill my friendly Wei and his subordinates. But at that time, I will definitely kill all of you, including the members of the conference who are not present today. As long as one of you goes back on your words, I will kill you. Whether you hide in the most remote star region or find a backer like the Emperor of the Empire, I will find you and kill you. Of course, if I am already dead before then, these restrictions will naturally have no power, but before I die, Su Lu said these words that made people feel inexplicably cold. His expression was calm and natural, but his mind suddenly remembered that when he left the Federation 3 years ago, he left a note to Li Xiaotong saying a similar threat. He smiled with emotion and said calmly to the leaders of the Bermuda Conference in front of him, "Please believe in my ability to keep my promises and fulfill them." These words hit the ground like a stone, splashing invisible dust and gravel into the ears of the leaders of the Bermuda Conference. They suddenly felt a little difficult to breathe, and their hearts began to beat faster. At this time, in their eyes, Su Li's ordinary face was particularly terrifying, and even his smile was particularly strange and bloodthirsty. The room was silent, and the sofa seemed to be about to be unable to withstand the torture of the pressure. In fact, it was just the trembling of the Bermuda Conference's leaders who were sitting on it that exposed their inner struggle. These leaders of the Bermuda Conference were ruthless and cunning, and they did not care about morality and promises. When they were forced into a desperate situation or the benefits were great enough, they dared to ignore the rules that had been passed down for thousands of years. However, they had to take this threat seriously because the person who spoke was Su Lu. They were indeed unwilling, but in the face of such a simple and direct threat from Su Lu, no matter how unwilling they were, in the end, they would probably become powder under the pressure of the round stone. A casual gust of wind would blow them away without a trace, just like the ashes of a person after death. The red leaf of S2, the little white flower of Ka Chifeng, the revenge from morning to night, the battle between one person and the Federation. Everyone in the world knew Su Li's temperament. They knew that this person would definitely do what he said he would do, and he would definitely do it, no matter how difficult or bumpy it was. On the iron-blooded road paved with hard stones by this small-eyed man, countless members of the Federation, generals, and princes of the Empire had died in his hands. The leaders in the box were the real big shots of the Bermuda Conference, but compared to the names that once shook the universe but now became ghosts, they were nothing. 3 chapters end. I am useless again. I am useless. Chapter 938. In the dead silence, Su Lu suddenly looked at Jihua and said with a smile, "Actually, we have dealt with each other before. You should know my habits." Jihua was confused. Since he took over the business, he had been smuggling all kinds of firearms. The people he dealt with were either gang leaders or organizations that couldn't be exposed, but he didn't remember meeting them. Su Lu reminded him, "There are 3 ships that disappeared." Jihua's expression suddenly stiffened. The thick cigarette that had been burning between his fingers fell to the ground with a bang. He stared at Su Li's face, speechless. As the only distributor of the TP sniper rifle, no one knew how tempted Jihua was when he saw this batch of goods. There was even one time when he was tempted by the little red dots and tried to swallow 10 boxes of sniper rifles for himself or sell them to the Federation or the Empire at a high price. However, just as he was preparing to carry out this matter, the 3 most advanced arms smuggling ships under his command suddenly exploded for no reason and turned into ashes in the dark universe. The furious Jihua conducted a detailed investigation of this matter, and confirmed that there were no outsiders mixed into the 3 ships from the dock to the departure. So, why did these 3 ships explode? At this time, an email from the mysterious supplier of the TP sniper rifle revealed all the answers. The supplier indifferently reminded him that if a similar situation happened again, it wouldn't just be 3 ships that exploded. The mysterious and unimaginable ability of the other party made Ji Hua extremely cautious and honest in the subsequent TP smuggling project. It wasn't until this moment that he realized that the mysterious supplier was actually related to Su Lu. Ji Hua picked up the thick cigarette from his feet and pressed it into the ashtray to crush it. He looked up at Su Lu and said with a hoarse voice, "I agree with your suggestion." The fiercest and most unruly firearms tycoons had already expressed their submission. The Bermuda tycoons, who had long been shocked by Su Li's words, no one jumped out to express their bravery and fearlessness. "If no one has any objections, please leave with us to find a quiet place. You can discuss with Li Wei how this war should end in a dignified manner and related details." Su Lu explained, "We are outsiders. The negotiation is between you and Li Wei or Lin Banshan." After saying this, he went to the wheelchair, turned it around, and pushed Leonardo out of the room. A heavy military backpack was hanging from the corner of the wheelchair. Inside it were a dozen or so federal military metal identity tags. The owners of these metal tags had all been buried in the smoke and conspiracy of Mo Hua Planet. The wheelchair slowly rolled over Descartes' corpse. Da Vinci coldly glanced at the corpse and calmly placed the big flower spear on his knees. Da Vinci's closest and most loyal team members had all been sacrificed when the 2 NTR camps were ambushed by the special forces of Small Eyes. Although he had managed to keep his life in the Southwest War Zone, the spaceship's medical cabin had not been able to save his 2 legs. He had been forced to amputate them, and there were even some terrible sequelae. Su Lu patted him on the shoulder and didn't say anything. Everyone knew that Descartes was Pabre's loyal dog. In this operation, everyone had deliberately left him for Pabre to kill because everyone knew that the person who hated the government the most was him in the wheelchair. The corridor was crowded with people. The people who seemed to have disappeared earlier suddenly rushed in. Those bodyguards who didn't carry guns or secretly carried a few guns watched their boss being escorted out by the members of Group 7. They didn't dare to make any big moves. As the wheelchair was pushed forward, under the 2 black barrels, several Bermuda heroes silently followed. The crowd in the corridor subconsciously separated to 2 sides. It was like the waves were separated by magic. It wasn't spectacular, but it left a deep impression. At the end of the corridor stood Li Wei and his members of the orphan gang. Those orphans and youths, who were known for being ruthless and fearless, looked at the men walking towards them. They smelled the distinct scent of the iron-blooded military camp on them. There was no longer any indifference and cruelty on their faces, only doubt and vigilance. They helped the orphan gang win the boxing match in the ring, and then captured the leaders of the conference. No matter how they looked at it, they should be their friends. They came to help them, but why did they help them? These men, who were obviously from the military, could easily sneak into the venue with guns and capture those terrifying heroes. The strength they showed was too terrifying. It was so terrifying that the orphan gang was full of anxiety. Only the ignorant could be fearless, and only the unloved could be fearless. The orphan gang was able to hold on for a month in this war and force the Bermuda Conference into a deadlock because of this temperament. But at this time, they knew that the small-eyed man who was pushing the wheelchair forward was Su Lu, so they were afraid and vigilant. People in the underworld had infinite respect for this name, but he was from the Empire. Then, were the men around him the legendary Imperial Royal Special Forces? What if the other party suddenly turned hostile and wanted to occupy Bermuda? At this time, the orphan gang was shocked to find that their leader, Li Wei, didn't seem to see the black barrels of the other party at all. He also ignored the warning glances of the people next to him and just walked forward. Su Lu let go of the hand that was pushing the wheelchair. The two opened their arms and hugged silently, patting each other's back hard to show how much they missed each other. There were many cars, armed men, and powerful guns outside the venue, but Su Lu and his team didn't seem to see them at all. They silently boarded the car and drove to the southern suburbs of Garth City. The Bermuda leaders waved their hands to signal their subordinates to stay calm. After making a few phone calls, they followed Li Wei's team to another place. Not accepting the orphan gang's arrangement, Su Lu and his team members chose a hotel in the southern suburbs of Garth City and slept soundly for the night. Zhong Huiyan was on the spaceship and was taken care of by Philip. Although most of the people in Bermuda knew that they were coming, they weren't too worried because of the scene in the venue. The next morning, Su Lu woke up, washed up, and had a simple breakfast. He then went to the window and looked at the bleak scenery on the streets and the scenery of a foreign land. The door was pushed open. Su Lu looked at Li Wei's haggard and tired face and said with a smile, "A night of negotiation is more difficult for you than a month of war. I really don't understand why you insist on that dream. When we were young, we saw the gangs in Zhonglo Street. Who needs to negotiate every day?" Li Wei frowned and walked over. He took the teacup from Li Wei's hand and drank 2 mouthfuls. He then handed over a stack of documents and said, "Although we have been arguing about the details for a long time, and the medical fees and compensation are a headache, there are basically no major problems. We have agreed to withdraw our troops immediately today." "What is this?" Su Lu looked at the documents in his hand and asked. "The armistice agreement. The other party requires you to sign it. Although I'm the one in charge of the negotiations and we're talking about Brother Mid-Mountain's property, it's obvious that if you don't sign your name, those old guys won't believe it at all." Su Lu smiled, took the carbon pen, and signed his name. After drying the handwriting, Li Wei took the documents and walked out of the room. When he reached the door, he suddenly stopped and looked at Su Lu in silence. After a long time, he sighed and said, "I didn't expect to see you again in this life. We are still young. As long as we don't die, we will see each other again. I will immediately send someone over to change your accommodation." Li Wei waved the ceasefire agreement in his hand and said with a smile, "When I come back, if you are well rested, I will take you around. This is now my city. Look at your smelly face." Su Lu shook his head. When he heard the word around, he was tempted. He had been to Bermuda 3 years ago, but he had never had the opportunity to walk around this strange star field. After thinking for a while, he contacted Philip. "You and Little Watermelon come down and play." At around 10 o'clock, Su Lu and his team members changed hotels. Xiong Linquan and the others were taken care of by the admiring youngsters of the orphan gang, while he was dragged out by Li Wei without hesitation. The expensive silver Phantom slowly drove on the street. Su Lu curiously looked at the street through the window. The spaceship arrived at Pop Star 2 nights ago, and after landing on the surface, he had been collecting information and preparing for battle. He did not have the opportunity to take a good look at the strange buildings. The architectural style of Bermuda was different from that of the Federation and the Empire. Although it was somewhat similar to the Federation, there was also a big difference. The appearance of each building was very different, and the lines were particularly strange. If one wanted to praise it, it could be said that it was very artistic. If one did not like it, it could be said that it was very deformed. From the southern part of the city to the suburbs, gun holes and bullet marks could be faintly seen on the street. Because of the war that had lasted for many days, it was full of killing intent. However, in the depths of the side alleys, there was a clear smell of alcohol, mucus, and the like. Su Lu was used to the smell of chaos that was deeply rooted in the flesh of the city. Just like every time he went to the port, his mood would become a little impetuous. Fortunately, the place to drink was very simple and quiet. This was a barbecue stall. It was not open during the day, but when the Silver Phantom, which had become like a protective talisman of Ska City, stopped at the stall, The sleepy boss and the servants immediately showed boundless enthusiasm and excitement on their faces. They quickly set up a small square table on the side of the street. Su Lu and Li Wei had known each other since they were young. When they were young, they mingled together in Zhonglo Street and those mines. Their relationship no longer required any pleasantries. All that was needed was 2 bottles of wine and a few words. Do you still remember what my dream was when I was young? Li Wei raised his neck and poured a cup of colorless and transparent liquor into his stomach. The heart-piercing burning sensation instantly stimulated his face to glow. Of course I remember. You wanted to become the fiercest black boss in Heshi province. Su Luan hurriedly picked up a piece of pig's ear with his chopsticks and slowly chewed it. Then, he lifted the wine cup and sipped it. Although it was slow, the cup was still emptied. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your earliest dream. Su Lu stared blankly. Then, a nostalgic smile appeared on his face. You wanted to stew all the beef from the black market at 6th Zheng's stall. Author's note. Lord Wang Jinglu's book review at the top of the book review section needs support. I also need support. I spent an entire night working on the outline for the latter part. When I counted, I found that I had written more than 8,000 words. I still have to write 3 more chapters. I'm really going to die. What kind of support? If you love me, you can hug me. If you love me, you can kiss me. This rule is restricted to girls, regardless of age. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.